Okay, we're live, MythVision podcast. As you know, I love to dive into people's stories, get their experience, and a lot of people who watch these videos get a lot out of them. These aren't your typical scholarly, rigorous deep dive into the weeds and the grammar and the contextual, textual criticism and comparative mythology. Nah, this is a person who wears a body like we do, who feels and experiences like we do, who's trying to have answers and figure out the world around him, just like we do. And so, with that being said, let's introduce our guest. Welcome to MythVision, Brandon from MindShift.
How's it going, man?
It's going. It's going. A lot of people are excited about this discussion. You and I have been behind the scenes, kind of hinting at it. It's got to happen. It's going to happen. And here we are. So, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Like you said, it's been a long time coming. One of the things that kind of stopped me for a while is like, man, it's Derek. I want the perfect topic because I've wanted to have you on. I've wanted to get on with you and talk, whether it's Greek myth or Homer or whatever. I was like, there's got to be that perfect one. But I love what we're doing today, just kind of going through the deconstruction, the deconversion. My main goal is to always help people. And I think relating to people is the best way to do that. So we'll start with this, and next time we'll pick up a particular topic.
Yeah, and I hope people who are obviously tuning in will take the time, go subscribe to his YouTube channel. It will be in the description. I've got it pinned in the comment at the top, and looking forward to that. Seeing the growth of what our communities can do, merging together, helping each other out, and making more noise. Look, let's be honest up front. I get a lot of people who go, why don't you interview Gary Habermas, or why don't you interview William Lane Craig? Well, I have reached out to some of these guys and they haven't responded. And I wonder why. Not saying that they were afraid or anything like that. I'm just saying they're probably not going to participate on a channel that's actually trying to help people find freedom and find themselves, even if that means holding to some form of belief that is obviously less harmful and helpful for their lives versus what we once held to. And so I say that to say, like, I really hope that today's conversation, people can see you for you, and maybe it'll help someone who might be struggling go through this. The way I like to begin this whole thing is to go back. I like to go back to memories of when you were young and maybe get a little bit of context of your household before we end up going to a climax of following you in your journey to what made you who you are and where you are today. So if you don't mind, tell us about how chaotic, I'm just kidding. Tell us about your life and what it was like. Were your family religious? Were you born into a Christian household? Take us into a little bit about that.
Sure. And I'll trust you to kind of guide the path here because I could talk about any individual part of this ladder for hours. So you're going to have to either cut me off or maybe I'll try to help myself. But I was born on the mission field. I was born in Central America. My parents were medical missionaries during some tumultuous times in the 80s down in Central America. So we were kind of all over the place. My sister and I were both born down there. So I can give you a pretty good idea already of the commitment from my parents. They have since gone very different directions, and we can talk about that later. I'm learning more and more each day. But we didn't stay there long. They were there for 10 years, but I was born at the very end of that. And we moved back to the States. They got a divorce. And my mother became the missions director for a large Assemblies of God church here in the States. And so moved from missions for a decade of her life to coordinating missions on a global level. Pretty intense stuff. She also started a nonprofit that helped refugees and international students. And so being exposed to the nations, to the gospel goal, the Great Commission, was at the very root of my entire childhood, just to kind of start us off broadly there.
So real quick, just shout out. I'm going to try to avoid getting into supers till the end because I don't want to interrupt your story. Again, I don't know if you've ever met Deconstruction Zone yet, but I got to make it happen, man. If you haven't hooked up, you guys really should.
I'm excited to talk to Justin. I actually have planned to reach out to him on a very specific topic. I've, as we talked about earlier, I'm just behind on that. So
Thank you again, Justin. Need to see that happen. So you're born into a household where mother and father are both devout assemblies of God. Were they both part of that denomination when you were young?
It's interesting. So, they would both claim semi-religious roots as they grew up, but my mother was officially saved by a tract that she found on a bus when she was 16. So she's got that, grand conversion story from
Yeah.
a pretty traumatic household that she grew up in that probably went to church, a few times a year. Same thing with my dad. My dad, probably looking back and piecing together things, looks like he got into the ministry when he met my mom. He grew very fast. I've heard his preaching on tape. It was unbelievable. I mean, truly a fantastic preacher and teacher. But neither of them, so to speak, came from as serious a household as what I became born into.
Got it. Got it. And can you tell us what their particular flavor of Christianity was when you were little?
As fundamentalist and fanatical Pentecostalism as you could probably imagine, the whole thing. The main church that I grew up in, and I kind of evolved out into more and more progressive Christianity from the beginning. In high school, when I started kind of going to my own church with my friends, things took on a new flavor, and then college, and then early married life, etc. But that first church, that main Assemblies of God, was everything that you would expect it to be. It was the dancing in the aisle. It was the people falling over with the power of the Holy Spirit. It was the speaking in tongues and the improper speaking of tongues, looking back, and non-interpretation of tongues and conflicting interpretations, scandals, the whole thing, which I'm always hesitant. Like, it's important to tell the whole story. One of the things, and I wonder if you've ever dealt with this too, as I talk about like the fundamentalism I came from, I almost feel like I'm often giving the Christian or the would-be skeptic of my story permission to be like, not real Christianity, And I've experienced real Christianity, if there was such a thing, or more doctrinally accurate Christianity, again, if there was such a thing, especially in my grown-up life. But yes, it did start pretty intense.
You're going to get that no matter what. It wouldn't
True.
matter if you were Catholic. Well, that was satanic. I just asked the Protestant or the certain kind of Protestant. But if you're charismatic, you're really off your rocker. I can't believe you did this. By the way, that was my experience. The first church I was devoutly involved in, though I did go to a Christian private school, when I took it really serious, was a speaking in tongues, prophesying, gibberish, rolling on the ground, casting out demons, the whole nine, and evolved from there like you described. So you're a kid, your mom and dad, how old are you? Like, as far as you're moving from Central America, you're coming to the States, mom and dad are splitting up while you're a teen, or?
No, they split up when I was like 4 or 5, just a few years after we got back to the States. And then it was framed, and this is so incorrect of my mother, and not to throw her under the bus too much, but my dad had backslid and was going to hell, and he wasn't going to church anymore, and all of these things that she wanted to make sure I didn't become. And looking back, this self-fulfilling prophecy side of the whole thing, I'm sure everyone like loves. My mother's like, look what you did, to my dad. But my dad never was an atheist. He just had his own ideas. And I think that what he encountered on the mission field, he felt really bad about. They were reaching these Mayan tribes, these truly indigenous people that spoke not even Spanish, like Mum languages. And he was fluent. He understood what was going on, but he recognized they were just stealing their culture. They were just trying to make little American Christians. And I think that was the tipping point for him. He felt bad. So he couldn't do it anymore with a good conscience. And then that did not jive well with my mother. And so it was like, all right, let's go back to the States to go our separate ways, essentially. And it hasn't been until the last few years where I've been more vocal to my dad about coming out as an atheist, where he was like, I almost feel like I convinced him, which is so funny because looking back on it, everyone thought my dad was the bad influence, but he still believed in a God. He still believed he had a personal relationship. He just saw it very differently. So it's something that's interesting for me to continue to piece together too.
So your dad was is he still a believer today?
He would not say so. No, I don't know how much, we are on the exact same page with our level of atheism in this particular God concept, but he's been pretty much on board with most of the things I've said.
Okay. Okay. So sorry to jump ahead. I like to try
No,
and
you're
stay
fine. Yeah.
chronological here, but there's an important aspect, I'm sure, as your journey unravels and where you go. So your mom and dad are split. You're back in the States now and you're 4 or
Hmm.
5.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Started attending a private school. Sounds like you did as well.
Yes.
Christian school right down the street. In fact, I still live right next to it. Not a lot has changed here, and it's interesting. Most of my friends have their kids now at that school and reliving how we all grew up, and it's wild. Again, not to jump ahead, but yes, this
No,
private
no.
school was additionally as big a role in my spiritual life, if not more so, than the church. Although we were heavily involved in the church, as you can imagine, with my mom being the missions director.
Is based on your memory, how devout were you? Like, were you in love with Jesus and the stories? And I asked that because for me, I was raised kind of in an environment where my mom was Christian, dad was Catholic, didn't really go to
Hmm.
church, none of that,
Yeah.
except for maybe a few marriages in all my life. Um, there were moments where it was like profound, and my sincerity and my almost like obsession to it showed through action of how much I was about it, to where I was in like middle school and high school reading a Bible in a public school when all the other kids are talking about boyfriends and girlfriends and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So were you like, I almost want to say what's the DC talk saying they used to say, crazy for Jesus, or like,
Oh, sure. Well,
you
Jesus
know,
freak.
yeah, were you a
Y-
Jesus freak then, or
Yeah.
were you just kind of going through the motions as a believer who was copacetic and
I was pretty all in, man. There's seasons and there's times where you're convinced because of the own sin in your life and the sermon you heard that Sunday that maybe you weren't really as dedicated as you should have been, and you recommit your life and you go down for another altar call and all the things we're all so familiar with. But if you were giving me a scale between 1 and 100 on my early childhood devotion to Jesus, top 90s. I mean, I did the prayer. I remember it specifically in my sister's bedroom with my mom and sister when I'm like 4 years old. I meant it as much as a 4-year-old at that point can mean it. I was
right?
soon enrolled in something that was pretty common in the 90s for Assemblies of God churches. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's called Junior Bible Quiz. It's sports for Christian nerdy kids, and it's truly like what is the academia version of like quiz bowl stuff, but it's like that. But aside from how silly it sounds, Junior Bible Quiz, and it's just this little thing through the church. I was on a team that went to nationals. I did it for 8 years of my life. I studied hours a day, truly hours a day of memorization. We had to know things in NIV and KJV, and be able to recite which one, if it was a quotation question, and make sure that it's word for word perfect, in addition to all the facts and details that we were first forced to memorize. And so that was also a big part. So it's like between my Christian school with the Bible classes and worship in chapel, between Sunday night, Sunday morning, Saturday night, Wednesday night at church, and then all of this study in the meantime, plus the Bible studies at our house that my mom ran, the prayer groups that she ran, the missionaries that she had over, the missionaries that stayed with us because they would be speaking the next Sunday.
Mhm.
It was just inundated, true indoctrination from every vehicle possible, except maybe my father. And yeah, I was all in. We can continue to go up the ages, but I
Yeah.
believed, I felt I had a personal relationship. I felt like I really heard from the Lord. I felt like he was truly physically and spiritually present at all times, that I really believed in his omnipowers, that he was right there. I talked to him constantly, even as a little kid throughout the day. I stood up for him. As if I had a lot of Christian persecution, but I was made to believe that I had, right? Um, but it was just a bunch of other Christian kids that I thought didn't know as much as I did, or were sinning too much, and so I was the witness. But it's almost cringy to look back at how seriously I took it at that age, because it's not what we should have been doing. So
No, no. It's interesting that the all that played and factored into your learning and growing up, you would have known the Bible quite well compared to your peers. And you're going through these ages. You're saying your dad isn't as much of a religious influence on you. He used to be much more when you were really little, giving sermons. And then did you ever go visit him during the times with your mom and got a totally different outlook on life when you're around him? Or
Not so much. So I did the every other weekend thing for my entire childhood until I was like 17 and stopped, going over there on the weekends. And those days would be the only Sundays that I didn't go to church, which always felt weird to me. And I was never, it was my dad. So as brazen as I was with other people about my belief, I knew he already knew everything I knew. I knew that he probably knew it better than I did. And if for whatever reason he wasn't going to church anymore, and he also got remarried to someone that, was not a Christian, at least not past, just cultural Christianity. And that was hard. It was this weird double life of, 10, 11 days out of a 2-week cycle. I'm with my mom in this crazy indoctrinated religious environment. And then it was just chill weekends working at the farm. That's my dad ended up owning a farm and nursery and things like that. And I just went out there on the weekends and worked, and it was just not part of the conversation. It wasn't anti anything. He never said anything, props to him.
Yeah.
He understood my mom's point of view and how she was raising us, and she was the main provider and influencer, and he kind of just stepped back entirely from all parental roles, which would have included kind of the spiritual father one. So yeah, it was just this thing that was.
So he was someone you could go to, though, which is if you needed to, you could go to on questions or doubts or any of this kind of stuff. He would have been approachable.
Probably not. And I never did.
Okay.
I have a very good relationship with my dad now, but again, back then he was the spiritual enemy. So I wouldn't dare approach him about something like that, lest he would corrupt my soul. Again, it
Right.
sounds so ridiculous. It's my dad, but it was the framing from my mother and everyone else in my life too, to teachers, friends, parents, etc. My dad was the black sheep at the basketball games and things like that, because it was an entirely Christian community. And so it was just, yeah, kind of off limits, felt like.
If I may, I mean, look, I know all of this is personal, right? And anything you're not comfortable with,
No, don't worry about it.
okay.
I won't say anything I don't want to say, and I've been
Yeah,
pretty vocal
exactly.
on my own channel,
That's
but yeah.
it's simple as that. So what's your social security number? I'm just kidding. Um, so as far as your mom's, I imagine she ends up getting with someone else as well, a new
Nope.
husband? No?
No, one and done for her. Men just slowed
Wow.
her down. She took the Paul approach after that, and yep, still to this day single except for the church, and that was also quite the message.
How did you feel? I mean, like, I don't know. I guess that probably was a relief to you because some kids go through a bit of a trauma when they see their parents having to do, like, you were probably upset at your dad, I'd imagine, in some way, because we don't understand growing up. Here's
Sure.
dad with someone else who's not a Christian like mom was. And then you're coming from a spiritual lens, right?
Yeah. No, it's I mean, every divorced kid I think has their own traumas and questions, and also gets it wrong for a period of time in terms of who's to blame. 90s latchkey kid is kind of a cliche at this point, but mom was so busy with church that I was often just alone at home studying my JBQ like a good boy, junior Bible quiz, or those couple days at dad's, but it I never really blamed either of them. I probably tried to have a rebellious phase in junior high where it was like, you screwed up my life kind of a deal, but it didn't last long. And I think I was always a bit critically aware of like, everyone's doing the best they can and people are going to mess up. Like, I didn't hold either of them on this insane pedestal like some kids I think can do. And so it was just, yeah, I didn't have a lot of judgment on him other than, which I know sounds like difficult considering what I was told about him, but I just figured that there was stuff I didn't know. I did decide at some point, I remember, that he was wrong and probably going to hell. I think that was preached enough at me that I just had to accept that.
Mhm.
And that's a real weird thing. We always talk about, I'm sure you've talked about it at some point, but there's this dissonance in Christianity in general where if you really believe in hell, in fact, I just kind of did a video where I talked about how Penn Jillette said something similar. Like, if you really believe in the concept of hell, it's insane not to like try to save, especially those you love the most. And
Right.
yet I wasn't preaching at my dad every Sunday. And again, I think it's because I knew he already knew this. So if he made a different decision, like, I wasn't going to tell him anything he didn't know. It was just going to be judgment and shame. And even then I understood that that wasn't going to be effective. So it's just like, I'll just be an example. I'll just continue to believe and do the right things. And that kind of changed my testimony and my witness and my evangelism quite a bit in retrospect, understanding that like my dad and stepmom, I couldn't even convert. So, what really is it? Is it street preaching? Is it handing out tracts? And I did all of that stuff too. Or is it being a good example and loving other people? And luckily, for a good portion of my childhood, I erred on that other side.
You reminded me of an experience I had with my dad because I feel you and me have a lot more in common about we almost feel called in such a manner that we're like main characters in the game. If you want to use analogies here, we're the main characters in the story of Christ's redemptive act on earth of trying to help save souls. So we're like main characters, and it's unfortunate that there's so many NPCs, so to speak, who aren't
Right.
taking it seriously. And my dad wasn't giving any indication that he was a born again Christian. He was only Catholic. I've never heard him say, Lord, come into my heart. I was a young teenager before we moved to Puerto Rico or after. I can't remember, but I think it was before. I was really young. He was about to go on a mission because he was in 7th Group Special Forces and always going to combat zones. And he was going to
Oh, wow.
Colombia, cartel, something to do with cartel kind of mission. And I remember going, this might be your last trip. This might be it. And I have to tell you. So I like coercively, emotionally, like gave him the gospel there that he needs to recite, he needs to mean it, he needs to accept Jesus, because if he dies, he's going to hell, right? And I remember him being very derogatory. My father was alcoholic as well, so maybe he had a few to drink that day, I'm not sure, but he got real pissed off and he snapped on me. And I remember being just broken, crying and doing it. And my mom's right there. I can't remember if my younger brother was there, but my mom, as soon as dad went out in the garage after yelling at me, mom goes, you planted the seed, son. Good job.
Jeez.
Right. So she encouraged the idea.
Yeah.
And I thought a miracle happened because that Sunday we're at church and I'm praying and I'm asking God for a sign. I'm doubting because kids in the public school, they mock me and laugh at me because I'm reading my Bible at lunch. And I'm like really charismatic and all about Jesus. And I'm in a public school, by the way. This is not even like a private one, where this wouldn't seem the norm.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad knocked on the door. It was a house charismatic church where we really believed that spirits and demons and dwelt stuff. I burnt all my Pokemon cards, probably.
Same. I actually burnt my Pokemon Red Game Boy, like literally in a metal trash can, lit it on fire. I think we do have some kindred moments here.
You and me, I'm telling you, enough about me, but he showed up. I thought it was a miracle. And, I was like, the only reason he could have showed up is God, right? Would have done this. No, he loves his son, and his son legitimately like put him on the spot and made him feel guilty. So he wanted to show me his love. And he showed up to church that Sunday and thought it was probably weird, the kind of stuff we did with the tambourines and bouncing around. So turning it back to you, you're teenager. Do you plan on, like, you're so serious about Jesus and stuff, are you planning on becoming a pastor? Are you wanting to preach? What is your goals?
It's interesting, man. Again, I don't know how better to explain it than like this double life, and it's something that I think devout Christians would look at now and be like, you were never really a Christian, because for as much as I believed and as much as I felt I had a personal relationship, I was so not wanting to be in the ministry. I think I saw the toll on my parents from being missionaries. I saw what was involved for my mom on a daily basis in being a missions director. Obviously, my dad was a pastor and had backslid. And every third Sunday in between like calls for money and talking about new developments, I think there's a few people here who have the gift of teaching, and I hope that God is working in your heart right now for what he's going to have you do in ministry. And of course, like, you're sitting there because everyone is sitting there. Like you said, main character syndrome. You're told that you have spiritual warfare all around you. You're told that you're talking to the creator of the universe on a daily basis. And so, yeah, when a pastor says something purposely vague like that, you do what everyone does with their horoscope or their fortune cookie and you apply it to yourself. And so I always felt like I was called into the ministry. And that was like my little Christian rebellion. And I remember I would meet people that would help give me excuses, or I would latch onto the excuses they had. Like, there's prayers and there's doers, and then I even met someone that was all about like leading financially by being in business so that you could support the people that would go and do the groundwork, right? And I started to give myself a little apologetic about how I could actually serve better
Hmm.
by not being directly in the ministry and stuff. And so that was something I fought with and felt guilty about quite a bit. And one of the things that probably has to come up, although I have talked about it a bit on my channel, so I don't want to beat a dead horse for those that are coming over, is I had a pretty severe prophecy by a very powerful missionary that stayed with us, that he said this one directly about me in front of our entire like 3,000 person congregation. And it was about the amazing, truly amazing and different things that I would do for the Lord, that like Moses level things. And my mom believed it entirely. And of course, I believed it entirely. And then of course, every believer who was there, that was everyone who was a part of my life, believed it and had this expectation. And so it's like the weight of that on top of all the ministry stuff I just talked about was a real dissonance for me as a Christian, where I was just like, what is this going to look like? And there were times where I would just give it over to God, right? And be like, all right,
Right.
I'm a vessel. This might be my flesh, my sin nature that doesn't want to do this. This might be the corruption of the devil. So, I'm allowed to feel this way, but ultimately I'm going to do whatever I'm actually supposed to. Because when you're a kid, you just think like, oh, there will be an adult version of me that figures this all out. But I didn't make steps to go into ministry, is the short answer to your question.
It's funny the way you paint that. As growing up as a Christian, I loved theology. I loved studying Bible and studying a lot of the ways people understood it that were really deep thinkers and things like that. But then there was this level at which I wanted in my mind, but never wanted to commit to. And that was like overseas missionary activity on a whole, like go building huts for people who don't have homes, like a different level of like risking one's life and going out there and doing these things. It's like I wasn't really ready to forfeit that much of my life. I'd rather just focus on how can I educate the sheep and teach the church.
Right. I'm a missionary in my own city. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the famous saying, like the hard teaching. If you take Jesus's words to the bank, listen, you got to take up your cross. Like who does that, right? Like, I don't know. I don't think I've ever met a Christian in my life who legitimately actually follows the teaching of Jesus when it comes to that type of willing, like almost intentional death. Like it's not like it's almost death by cop. It's almost intentional suicide for Jesus. And I don't think I've met anyone who takes the teachings that extreme. I flirted with it in my mind, these kinds of things. Never did it. I'll tell you a funny story briefly, though. I was struggling with addiction. I was back drinking. Been through many phases in my life. I'm in a church in a tank top with a U.S. like I got the U.S. flag tank top. I'm all muscular. I'm like going to the gym. I'm thinking I'm the man, but I'm hard-hearted. I know I'm screwing up. And me and my wife at the time were struggling in our marriage. And I'm in this church, and there's thousands of people. It's called Covenant Love in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Thousands of people. I am hungover. I'm practically still drunk from last night. We partied all night. And I'm in there, and I'm standing there, and they're worshiping. It's some, out of town guy, charismatics on stage, and he's talking about someone in here. So I can feel it, doing his spiel. And he turns and he's like, "Oh, there's a great calling." I mean, like it's a whole nother level, right? And then he points the finger, and it's me, and I'm looking behind me, going, "It's got to be someone back here." Like, and he's going, like, "No, you." In front of everybody, I have to walk up on this church. I'll never forget getting called out by thousands of people in here watching. People.
How'd you respond to it?
Probably, huh?
How did you respond to it?
I was just humbled by it because, I mean, at this time I wasn't not a Christian. It's not like I didn't accept the worldview. I just felt backslidden, and I was like, man.
So did you feel like it was a conviction? Was that like the message was like, come back, like do better? Or was it like great? Okay.
Yeah, do better. And at the time, I'm pretty sure they could smell the alcohol,
Right. Pretty easy pick. Yeah.
Yeah. So then they're talking to me on the side, and they're encouraging it and all, like, you can do better and stuff. And there's so much more I can't get, like, out of the respect for other people's context and names. I can't name some of the stuff. My life was chaotic. I'll put it that way at the time. And it did give me, like, get back on track, dude. But Jesus was kind of like methadone. It was kind of like all right, I can go to this different thing and it'll maintain me as long as I'm doing it. And eventually something clicked, but we'll get there, I'm sure, at some point, whether or not I get it in this episode or it comes out in another deconversion story. So you're what, teenager, finish high school? Are you going to Bible college? What are you doing with your life? Are you just get married young? What happens in your?
Yeah. That's a big gap of time. Let me try to be succinct.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to get from teenager to like where you begin to start to deconstruct, or at least have doubts, and that might have started something. So
yeah, no, I mean, there's so much we could cover. The junior high years were big for me. That's when I felt maybe the most devout, if that's the right word. You know, even amongst puberty and girlfriends and things like this, it was like, okay, you know, that's the first sign of like growing up, of being some adult version of whatever this Christian thing's going to look like and what kind of decisions you're going to make. And I got in with a really good friend group. I had lots of good friend groups. I was in sports, the JBQ thing as well, the church stuff. My private school was like 75 kids from 2 years of preschool all the way up through 8th grade. And then we all went to a public high school together. There wasn't many Christian private schools in high school, or at least none that most parents wanted to pay for. And so we enter high school, public high school, huge high school, 3,600 people total. My graduating class was like 800 people. And I'm of the mindset that none of them are believers, right? If they didn't come from a private school like me, like these are all secular, just maybe even bad, sinful people, right? And it's so awful to look back. I made wonderful friends. I truly loved people. I had great friendships and relationships, but there was always this, well, where do you go to church? Well, what do you believe? You know, it was just a constant part of it. And I think that annoying Christian freshman in me got beat down pretty quick by just the reality of people don't care like I cared. They weren't against me. No one hated God. All the things that I had been predisposition to believe from my private school about what it would be like. You know, you probably remember, I remember specifically like a basketball practice where I missed 2 layups in a row, and my coach was like, that shit's not going to fly in high school. Yeah. And it was kind of the same thing from the Christian perspective. Like, you can't be weak when you go and you're surrounded by, 30 people in a class that don't believe. Like, you need to be let your light shine, and it was interesting because there was kind of a decision made amongst like an inner core group of friends that we saw how unsuccessful, if that's the right word, our evangelism was. And it became more about like, again, kind of this constant theme of, okay, well, just be a good Christian, just lead by example, just love people. How would Jesus have handled it? And again, I'm thankful for that because I think I probably did a lot of less damage to other people that didn't believe like I did than I otherwise would have, or that I had done previously. And so there was this kind of mantra for us in high school about, like, it sounds so stupid, being cool Christians, right? Like, we could still hang out with people. We could still have normal conversations. We could still go to the movies. But then that led to that double life of like, should I have seen that movie? Like, am I being a bad witness? Like, what did I just let into my heart? And so this insane tension all the way through. And, that's high school. And then I didn't go straight to college. I did like some community stuff, but I started working, like just pretty legit work, and and then got a career. And I went back to college later for a business degree at a Christian university, and I got a Bible degree as well while I was there. And so that was my Bible degree education at the Bible college, which I'm not sure which was worse looking back, their Bible teaching or their business teaching. The business classes were like how Jesus handled the money lenders. You know what I mean? I was like, how am I getting accredited right now for a degree in business? But just a little anecdote.
I can relate to your experiences. I want to get back to this point about the mindset that you just said that was really powerful. I think we could have a lot to discuss there, or at least something to discuss there. But just like you, I started working immediately. I had gotten my wife pregnant with our first son. So I'm in high school and she's pregnant with my first son. And because I'm a good Christian, her mom has to sign her over by law to me as like
Wow.
I'm now her caretaker. I'm like the parent for her. So I become her legal guardian, and she's like a year younger than me. And she has a baby, and then I end up going and doing landscaping and lawn care for years. Of course, loving the Bible, listening to Ravi Zacharias and William Lane Craig on CDs, like endlessly listening to CDs and audios and stuff of these guys. And then there was a moment I worked at the Christian bookstore and like would get all these DVDs and discounts and buy all sorts of stuff. I was really into it. But then later got into college and got my associate's degree in biblical studies at a fundamentalist college, and then relapsed, had my wisdom teeth pulled and fell. I mentioned this in the last episode I did on deconversion, but about the mindset, this is going to sound a little crazy to the viewer, but when people say that we weren't real Christians, right? You're not a real Christian. And we know how extreme we were, like even down to, I should have said this, I shouldn't have said that. I should not have seen that image on the screen
Right.
of that horrible video or that movie, or like, why did I think that? You're literally blaming yourself for thoughts, and you're trying to fight your thoughts, not just like, what did I do? But like, even your thinking is sinful, and you are living this sinful, constant struggle in your own brain. And if someone saw it, were able to somehow print it out or pop it up on a computer screen, they go, you're insane. Like,
Right.
you're really crazy. What is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with your brain? And when people make those claims that you weren't real Christian, you've been psyching yourself out for 15 years doing all this stuff, like literally trying to do spiritual warfare and control your thinking because Christ said da 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 da. It's almost an insult, to people like us who have found offense to that. At this point, my skin is super thick and it's like, whatever, dude. It's the typical theological position you're going to bring to the table. No wonder you have to say that. Like, you can't.
Right.
Your once saved, always saved idea or whatever is getting in the way. But you almost want to. It's going to sound crazy. You almost want to go, I wish you could flay your brain out and then compare it to my brain and see who is more about Jesus. Like how crazy can you get when you feel like you want to express, were you as nutty as I was? I don't think so. So how the hell can you say you were more about Jesus? I was crazier for him than you were. Like,
Yeah.
It sucks.
It's a really, really difficult thing because, of course, doing what we do, we get that all the time. And I started a series like When Christians Respond, where I'm just trying to handle like the main things like, oh, everyone worships something, or atheism is just another religion, these things. And one of the ones that I've wanted to do that I haven't yet is this, you're never really a true Christian, because it is an interesting little dichotomy. I don't know the best response because, in one hand, with what I know now, no one's a true Christian. On the other hand, like under the guise of who Jesus was and what supposedly he said and preached and what it meant in the religion to be a Christian in terms of giving your life over and denying yourself and trusting in him for the salvation of your sins, et cetera, et cetera. Like, of course, I was as real as a Christian as anyone else who's ever thought they were a Christian. But you're right. It is a defense mechanism from them that they simply cannot accept. It doesn't even matter what their theology is, whether they believe that you can lose your salvation or not.
Yeah, that's true.
It was some. I mean, of course, we're painting with broad brushes here, strokes, but it was Ruslan KD. I'm sure you're familiar with that channel, but he was interviewing someone and asked him, like, do you believe in once saved, always saved? And the guy's answer, such a good Christian answer, was, I believe once saved, always saved if you were really saved the first time. And it's like, well, that's just it, right? Like, you draw the line in the sand where it works for you. And then anyone who does backslide or falls away or becomes an atheist or doesn't do what you think is just, they never actually arrived in terms of being able to lose it. And so, yeah, it's a lose-lose game that I've been disinterested in playing. But
by the way, there's a form of that
frustrating
even in the Quran. Like, there is a form of this in the Quran. I can't remember what surah, but this idea that they weren't really of God, they weren't really of Allah, and so you do get this idea. So if they really leave Islam, they were never truly Muslim to begin with, and like this is a common theological issue in both Abrahamic faiths. But yeah, again, I just thought how crazy when you were describing. I shouldn't have watched that movie, and I'm like, oh my God, dude! Like, you and me were burning I was burning the Pokemon cards, believing that the spirits and demons, these were actual like demonic gods that were in the cards. And dude, there were like, who knows what rank? I can't remember how you ranked like the specific cards to see what their value is today. I had so many char cards. I had so much probably money that I could have used for my children today.
Yeah.
And I burned them at a campfire with my Christian buddies, and we were praying over the fire, watching the colors from the cards and thinking, those are demons.
So wild.
Look at the color in the fire.
Oh my gosh. Just the blue plastic burning. It's so crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what you'll find. I mean, you mentioned it earlier too, like with the example with your dad coming to church. You know, you interpret everything through the frame of the spirit world, essentially, and it's so powerful, that confirmation bias. You know, I saw it in everything too, and then you see how much of it is orchestrated behind the scenes. I remember one of the first times that I had ever made money, like I mowed a lawn or something. I had $10 in my pocket, and we were at church, and the offering plate came around, and it was like, oh my gosh, like I can give an offering, and do I do it? Like, I was so happy to have this $10, and you know, it's coming quick. Like, you got to make that decision. And I'm sitting next to my mom, and I can feel the like, is he gonna do it? And I do it, right? And then later that day, she buys me a new Lego set, and under the guise of like, God wants me to reward you. Look, like when you put fruit in, you'll be able to sow, yada, yada, yada. And again, like, devious of her, manipulative of her, but not from her perspective. From her perspective, she's the vessel working through Jesus to properly reward me for my faith, because that's where she's at, and she's the only one that knew. And so like, I see her point of it, but then I continually, I'm sure you do as well, have these moments of like looking back and being like, oh shit, like look how contrived it all is. And even if it's not, you know, that's a really blatant example.
Yeah.
But what we do in our own mind to make those things stick and happen and represent truth is crazy.
This gets to one more point, and then I want to get back to your life, but this is a really good point. We're landing on some really deep, I think, moments that people who are watching are going to relate to, probably chuckling at home, or, oh my God, that was me, you know? That is this idea that you just described, how your mom contrived this whole notion, and you might have thought from your perspective, hey, this was a reward from God because I get blessed for putting in, I'm going to get even more. And she almost is like, in a way, making sure that in her view, she's just blessing you as a mom, probably, but it worked to make you believe, oh, this truly, when you give, you're going to get much more. And it confirms that spiritual aspect. Well, a lot of viewers, and I get this a lot, they ask an interesting question. They're kind of triggered. You can tell in the comments. When they ask it, they do something like, how can you say you knew Christ and then today say you're not a Christian anymore? Because if you knew him, you would never forsake him or leave him. If you knew Christ, if you actually knew him. And I get what they mean by knew Christ, because you and me had deep conversations with Jesus in our heads. We had our conversations with God, with Jesus. I mean, I was praying to all three of them at times. Sometimes I was just praying to the Holy Spirit. Sometimes I'm praying to Jesus.
Ooh, you're a special one. I actually just made a joke about that on a recent video that I did about this concept. Or it wasn't necessarily about that, but I did start with, you know, making a little joke. The Holy Spirit always gets left out, because I always prayed, you know, sometimes to God, sometimes to Jesus, sometimes to God through Jesus, but I never said dear Holy Spirit. So good on you, man. I just tried to cover bases. It wasn't like I always did. I think the most common was Father God, right? Because everybody goes Father God. But I tried to cover all bases. The point is like, when you have that much conversation in your mind, the sincere person who's believing in this religion will feel like they know this person. And what I think happened, and correct me if your experience is the same, because we're jumping the gun here, but we're going to get to what happened that changed your views and how you became where you are as a non-believer. For me, it wasn't I stopped knowing Christ. I now have rationalized what it was. So for the believer, if you're trying to hear out a still man of our view, and correct me if your view is different here, Brandon, it's not that we stopped knowing Christ, is that all those conversations we had with Christ, we figured were ourselves the whole time in our heads. So we were actually, if you will, talking to ourselves. And I talk to myself to this day. Huh? Yeah, no, I was just agreeing and confirming. Yeah, exactly the same. You know, and I think it's one of the reasons that, like good educational, psychological, and rational teaching are so important in neuroscience to understand like there are psychological phenomenons that explain all of this, and not like unapologetic that has to stretch the truth to explain, like, no, we know this. And even the Christian can know that this is true when you compare it to anyone in another religion that believes they're, speaking to Allah or speaking to Krishna or whatever. They're being guided, they're being loved, they're being led, they're being comforted by their God. It's so very simple then to just point out, and many of them don't. And this is something else, and I know I'm getting off track, but many Christians can't even fathom that people of other religions are having the same kind of spiritual experiences that they are. And
Exactly.
so first bringing Christians to that understanding, and then showing them that the reason we can all do this is because this is something humans psychologically are capable of. And people like you and myself and everyone else who is deconverted has come to the understanding that what we thought was the Holy Spirit leading us, what we thought was Jesus talking back, what we thought was God the Father comforting us, was our cultural network at play in our mind. And it would have been Zeus and Athena if it was a different time frame and culture and place, and it would have been
Exactly.
Krishna, etc. And so, yeah, that's such an important understanding, but I also understand why so many Christians can't get there in
Yeah.
their current belief system.
I get it. I mean, look, it's almost like a cultural tribalism in the brain about
Yeah.
your particular guy or God and whatnot. That we see this in almost everything: politics, social issues, you name it. Right? We have a mindset made up. So anyone who would even speak and say, I did know him, but he was me all along, and it was that framework in my mind." Um, I don't know if they can even quite get that. It's almost like we need to continue in your story, because I imagine some of this
Sure.
expanding your mind as you started to realize the world was much bigger than your bubble. It's almost, I always like to come back to the movie Bubble Boy. If you ever watched it, did you see that movie?
Maybe once on like a, yeah.
The mom at the very beginning, he's in a little bubble, he's young, he's like a little baby, and she's just like raising him in the house, like totally kept isolated from the world, saying, if you come outside of this bubble, you will die. You cannot live outside this bubble. So his entire life he's in a bubble. And I mean, he's a grown-ass man roaming the world with a bubble. Like, I'm talking about a big ball bubble, and he's like going all around it.
Yeah.
I'm spoiling the movie, sorry. So if you
I think
wanted
you're
to,
okay.
you should watch the movie. Either way, it's still hilarious because there's so much detail I'm not going to mention. But like, the bubble pops. How does he deal with it? Well, immediately thinks he's dead, or there's no way I'm going to stay alive. And now he has to rationalize, now that the bubble popped, he has to make sense of the world now. And
It's a good
everything
analogy.
he had been told was a lie from his mom. In a way, I feel like this is our experience with the kind of Christianity that we've been taught. And I say not the kind, I would just say fundamentally Christianity, because that's the quick, yeah. It's those assemblies of God. That's what
Right.
it is. It's those charismatic. Oh, it's the Presbyterian PCA Reformed. It's because you were Reformed. Oh, no, it was that Calvary Chapel that you went to, Derek, or whatever versions of Christianity, because it's easy for them to point fingers that way. So let's continue your journey. You're what, mid 20s? You're getting married. You have a Bible degree ish, and you are still devout.
Yeah, so I got married at 21, and maybe the first time that I ever allowed myself to doubt at all, like really never even let it in, even though having a dad who didn't maybe believe, was when I was engaged. I remember thinking like, shoot, I better figure this out quick, because like I'm engaged to a Christian woman, we're planning a Christian wedding, a Christian life together, raising Christian kids together. And I looked back just like a year ago when I was kind of first starting the channel at this journal entry, and I can't even believe how candid I had allowed myself to be in this journal entry. And I must have just turned it off, because the things that I was questioning there, I mean, there was everything. There was gospel contradictions. There was the justice of hell, all the normal stuff. But that would have been at like 20 that I'm fully having this conversation. And to give you an idea, I didn't deconvert or start my deconstruction till like 30. So I took an entire decade where I put it on the shelf, got married, had a couple kids, got a Bible degree, involved in church, really just figured there were people smarter than me that, I mean, this is why there are apologists. And it truly worked for me, because
Mhm.
yeah, there'd be little things crop up during that decade, but every single time I could just turn to Paul Copeland's book, right, and be like, oh yeah, no, that's what actually happened in the Old Testament. I didn't know the context, and it's just amazing how well that works, because we wanted it to work and they want it to work for us. They're not trying to convert anyone. They're just giving us the excuses we need. And I think between those questions and getting them answered, and then getting into more progressive Christianity that didn't make me feel as bad. Like, I recognized even early on, like early 20s in my marriage, I recognized the issues with fundamentalism. I recognized the harm that was doing, but I didn't blame God or Jesus or religion or Christianity. I just blamed that particular interpretation and acting out of it. And so I continued to look for what was closer to the truth. And then you start moving into free grace theology, and I dabbled in Calvinism a little bit, because how else could you explain the fact that God is totally 100% in control of everything, but people still go to hell? Like, you still have to marry some of these concepts together. And so I was always looking for what is most true. Like, that was the end goal. I didn't realize what a problem it was that there was all of these mismatched truths within supposedly the same religion until much later, and that played a big part in the tipping point. There was kind of a head of many things came together. But yeah, I would say all through my 20s, I'm building a Christian foundation for my marriage. We start having kids towards the end of that. We had my first son, my first child, at 28. And then things started to ramp up pretty quick after that for the deconstruction and eventual deconversion.
Before we get there, so we're climaxing here. We're almost at the peak. Who were some of your favorite apologists through your 20s?
There was a part of me that I know a lot of people get into, like, they watch this particular YouTube channel and they read everything this guy wrote, right? I never wanted to hear from man. And I know that sounds so like narcissistic. Like, why would I? It was nice if Paul Copeland could explain something that I didn't understand, but I was going to get my understanding from Jesus. I had my quiet times. I was reading my Bibles. All the answers were there. And, that's probably some of that fundamentalist Protestant upbringing of like sola scriptura, where it was like, I shouldn't need someone to explain it. It's great if so, but it was more like, it would just be happen chance. I'd see this video, I'd Google a question, and someone would have written a blog article about it. So I don't know all the people that I was getting influence from. There wasn't like I had a favorite. I remember like some last grabs in my deconstruction, just checking myself, doing the whole Lee Strobel and Frank Turek and Paul Copeland, like going through all of that just to hear what the final answers were from people that were popular at the time. But I wasn't even that big. I want to make sure I'm being accurate. I was going to say I wasn't even that big on theology. Like, there were people that I appreciated their insight and their commentaries. But again, I thought it should be from Jesus. I thought it should be from the Word, through the revelation. And so other than my own pastors and mentors and Bible study leaders and worship leaders and friends, etc., I didn't seek out a lot of additional resources.
Got it. Okay. So you flirted with some of it when problems arose and you may not have had good, quick answers to, but you're going almost into your 30s. And what?
I mean, that's not to say I didn't go through like severe teaching. Like, one of my biggest hobbies still and always has been is reading. But I would read everything. I would consume everything. Every commentary I could get on a book of the Bible, I read. I just wasn't following like one person down a rabbit hole. I made sure to. Like, if I already read someone's commentary on Job, I didn't also want to read their commentary on Psalms. Like, I was going to fact check that with another objective source of a different Christian interpretation of Job, and I was going to let Jesus reveal the truth. And so I still got quite the education. But when I compare it with how other people talk about it, I just don't think I was on the same track of like, oh, I'm going to follow Ravi and everything he says. Like, he's my guy. He's of the right Christian. I already hated that. I hated the denominational splits and differences. I hated like the bandwagging for an individual. And, that was probably my own self-righteousness of, oh, I understand better. Let's get objective sources. Let's round this out and let Jesus be head of the table. But that was my thinking at the time.
No, I get it. I mean, that makes sense. Some of us might have thought this guy's better than this guy. I mean, clearly I favored certain people when I listened to them. or I'd listen to the Bible and hear what it said, and then I'd go and check from way smarter guys and see, hey, how do you understand this, and why do they have different takes? This is all while I'm a Christian. Why do they not agree on this text here? Why is this not on the same? What's going on with this interpretation? So what happens 28, 29, 30 years of age that gets Brandon to go from full on, like, there's no way to put it into words, even if we spent days describing our experiences and all of this stuff, like, you can't even convey it unless you've lived it, right? So what happens that can put any kind of chink in your armor at this point with your belief in God?
Yeah, I'll try to be succinct because honestly, looking back, there's like 10 things folding in at this perfect crescendo that led to this great tipping point. The catalyst for sure was having my son. And, even for a good while during the pregnancy and into his first year and even maybe into his second year, again, that 30 is the number in my head where things like really ramped up. But that year and a half there was like, okay, I'm now responsible for someone else. Like, yeah, I've always been called to be a witness and we always need to evangelize and be ready to have a kind and gentle account. But I'm now raising another human being from scratch. And I realized, and I think most parents probably have this realization at some point, I could get him to believe whatever I wanted. And that also started to question things a little bit, like how much of this was because of what I was told on Mother's Knee versus like the truth of this. And so you start having that, like, am I just a product of my time, place, and culture? But put that out of my head still. And it was more about being responsible. I wanted to take the things off the shelf, is always the analogy I give, and really deal with them one last time before I committed to teaching another creature of my own making what the truth of the world was. Like, I really took seriously what it meant then to be a father and to be a spiritual example. And it got to such a point, many people think like that's when the deconstruction started and all the things started coming off. It actually went the opposite. For a while there at the beginning, what I realized is I had not been, kind of like we talked about earlier, what Jesus had asked us to be. I wasn't willing up until then to go to some foreign country and live in a shack and put my family in danger to make sure that all people from everywhere have had a chance to hear the gospel. And that conviction, that spiritual Christian conviction at the time of trying to be as Christ-like as possible, especially now that I'm leading a fuller family, pushed me in the direction where it was like up or out, as the expression goes. It was either going to be time to quit the corporate job, get into ministry, become a missionary, stop saving for the future. Like, let's put it all on the line for Jesus and really live the way he has asked us to live. But if I'm going to do that, I need to first understand those things that I have not understood or that I've doubted or that, again, I've put on the shelf. And so in that up or out, I went out. It's really as simple as that. Too many questions couldn't be answered. Too many contradictions showed up. When I was really willing to be as intellectually honest as possible and to research everything to the nth degree, and this is, a 3 to 5 year process essentially, there was nothing left standing. There was such a simple answer for all of it. The denominational issues. There's not the witness of the Holy Spirit. The hell issue. That is unjust. I don't need to make excuses for a perfect being. I shouldn't have to. I don't have to make excuses that his ways are higher. The divine hiddenness issue, well, that gets eradicated with Paul. If Paul's a murderer of Christians who is not reading his, not in his quiet times with Jesus, isn't asking to have truth revealed and God can meet him on the road to Damascus, but not answer my questions, who's devoted 30 years of my life, like for every major issue, there was such a clear understanding finally when I was honest of what the psychology was, what the indoctrination was, what the Christian excuse was, why the apologetic worked the way that it did, where I just couldn't defend it anymore. And once you're in a place where you can be honest with yourself, which, I mean, that's what indoctrination blocks you from. It blocks you from reality. And then all of the reinforcement, because again, other than my father, everybody, literally everybody in my entire life, at that point believed sincerely, devoutly, deeply. And it just reality hit finally. It took 3 decades, but it caught up.
So, okay, few questions, because it sounds like a tidal wave all at once. And you probably couldn't chronologically explain exactly what came first and what order on a Wednesday this and then the next month. So I want to kind of ask you, if you're able to kind of recall in your memory, were there moments where you started thinking this seems a little bit unbelievable, but if it is true, then I mean, I am so sincerely wanting the revelation like Thomas is doubting. I need you to reveal this to me. And if you do that, of course, I'm going to believe because it's obvious, you know. Are you starting to do that? Are you also not going to church as often so you're not being force fed, kind of indoctrinated to kind of continue thinking the way you were thinking?
Yes and no to parts of it. So, for the church question, I didn't stop going to church till like a year after I had already come out to my wife. Out of kind of this respect for her for a while, I thought that was maybe the right thing to do. We were still like taking our kids there, even though I didn't believe. I was kind of playing it the way my dad had played it, where I
Mhm.
was more silent. Is okay, like I don't believe anymore. I'm still figuring it out, but you know, I didn't quite have as much conviction of how inaccurate and harmful it was as I do now. And
Oh,
so, yeah, I was going to church even after I stopped believing. In terms of like seeking out, you know, desperate Hail Mary situations, for sure, like on my knees, crying, begging for the sake, not just of me, God, like, for my wife, for my children, like you have me here. I'm willing to lead them. I'm willing to go as far as you want me to go, but you've got to meet me somewhere along the way. Even when my first son, when we were pregnant with him, and I just said I was already doubting. I did a 7-day water fast, actually a little over 200-day water fast, water only, no supplements, no salt, no food, no nothing for my son. Like but also kind of meshed into
200?
that in 200 hours.
Oh,
Seven.
sorry.
It's
Okay.
like 8 days, a little over
Oh, you
7 days.
scared me. I'm like, huh?
No, 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 no. It was still very intense for me, and at the time, it was very spiritual, and it probably kept me in for like another 6 months because so much confirmation bias about what God had said to me in this fasted state, and it was like it was kind of like giving my son to the Lord, making this sacrifice at the beginning of his life while he's still in the womb, showing that I'm like willing to do whatever it is the Lord wants, right? Like people will look at that and they'll say like, oh, extreme, or you have a misunderstanding of fasting. But at that point, it didn't matter. The point was to show, even to myself, that the devotion was still there, the desperation for truth was still there, and the ability to be committed was still there. And so it was, continuing to prove to myself as much as anything that I was being sincere about this search. I wasn't just angry. I didn't just want to sin. I wasn't hurt. Honestly, my life was freaking awesome as a Christian. My
Mm.
wife is amazing. Our kids are so cool. Like, I've got great Christian friends. It would have only been upside to be able to continue to believe. There was truly no benefit or gain for me to deconstruct or deconvert. It's just the way my brain was wired, and I think came from some really healthy, sincere desires before I passed it on to my children. And so, being honest with myself like that allowed me to just, check my intentions at the door, which of course I prayed about and gave over to God as well. And then I felt a lot more peace when the answers, no matter what they came, because that is the whole goal of seeking truth, right? Like, if you're going to say, oh, I'm committed to truth until it's something I'm not comfortable with, or something that hurts me, or something that is going to ostracize me, you're not really seeking truth. You have to be
Yeah.
willing to follow it wherever it goes, which is the mantra of my channel for a reason. And so, knowing that I was going to go wherever the truth went, which still might mean getting it wrong, backsliding, and coming back to Jesus, that just hasn't happened yet, but I'm open to it. Like, I will go where the truth is. And under that conviction, I felt such freedom, even in this huge, shift.
It's really funny what you said there at the end, because the question will get thrown, what would persuade you, right? We've heard people ask this question, what would persuade you? I mean, I don't even think I think I could answer that for other people, and I know that the people would probably be resistant. I know Matt Dillahunty's been asked this question 100 times, and well, I don't know what would persuade,
But
this,
God would.
like,
Yeah.
and I get that, but I have some pretty good. I could throw out probably 100 things that could persuade me of something really going on beyond what we see around us on an everyday basis and experience on a typical basis. Um, and like they act like we wouldn't go there if the evidence suggested it. And that's unfortunate that they would just assume that's the case. Whereas I've been on their aisle. Like I've gone down the path that they're in. And I'm thinking to myself, unless you have experienced these things, and I'm not talking about like medical conditions that, maybe were misdiagnosed or potentially got better over time, or I
Yep.
found my car keys, or, I struggled with addiction. Jesus saved me from addiction. I had the exact opposite happen. In fact, getting clean and deconverting has kept my sanity and my I would say self-control on a whole different level compared to me ever as a Christian. And so it's been almost 10 years and I'm thinking to myself, I'm the opposite of what you think Jesus saved me from heroin. No, actually it was me being rational and actually coming to a more realistic view of the world that helped me actually get clean off heroin and alcohol and not having to go down that path. So you reminded me as well of this famous Ill of Mine Hobson song. I know you've probably heard this before.
With the way that I've been living lately, if I died right now, you turn the fire on. Sick of this bullshit. Niggas call me a sellout.
So that whole song is literally him crying out like, and I loved it when it first came out. I think it was about the time I was deconverting, and he's like just expressing himself saying like, I don't know if this is true. I don't have a talking snake or a donkey or, like I don't get all this stuff that the Bible seems to say, which tells you the kind of teaching that we were being taught, that Jesus literally died, literally rose, literally was born of a virgin, all these things. And now when we start studying, learning from even Christian scholars, this isn't like an atheist agenda or a secret society of destroy the Bible, we hate God or something. No. The facts, the evidence for the viewer points in the direction of legend or mythic, or this probably didn't happen at all. There may not even be a memory behind it, because sometimes people would blur the lines between history and myth and make legend. And, when you hear Christian scholars who are being as honest as you can possibly be, looking at the text going, there's not like a I hate God agenda. They love God. They say they love Jesus, but they say that virgin birth did not happen. They say that this story here did not occur in history. This is a legend. It never happened. Once you start seeing that stuff, it's like, oh, wow. So when people go, would you believe? I mean, yeah, if these kinds of things depicted in the text happened, I would really like start reconsidering I'm wrong. Nothing of the sort has happened. And had this conversation with my mom, so she knows I'm not just like violently resistant as if I don't want it to be true. I would love to see this party continue after this, Brandon. I'd love to see us have a party forever. Problem is, when I tell this to mom goes, well, I prayed about it, and God said he's going to reveal himself to you at some point later. He's going to show you. He's going to manifest, really, really show you with real things. And I'm like, well, when the day happens, I'll let you know. But again, I'm not holding my breath, and I don't live my day thinking that way.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of layers to it. I mean, this could have been an entire conversation on its own for the podcast, is about these different avenues of what would convince you to believe. If you did believe, is that the same thing as following Jesus? How do we account for God's ultimate plan, if there was a God that has a moment waiting for you in your future? This is something, there's two things here that I want to maybe talk about that were big thoughts I had in the middle of my deconstruction. And the first one is this, because my wife and my mother and people like this, who are the first people I came out to, they said something similar. My mom even referenced that prophecy over me and was like, I don't understand it. It breaks my heart. All I can imagine is that God will be able to use this, for greater when you do come back. And they have to tell themselves that to be able to deal with this loss, right? Or to be able to not fear that their baby boy is going to be burning in hell forever. But if you play that out to its logical conclusion, there's so many problems with it. And I remember that was one of the first things I thought, okay, that could be. Maybe God's allowing me to doubt and even straight up not believe so that my witness is greater for the great evangelical purposes he'll have me do later. But does that mean that he's interrupting my free will then, correct? If he knows there's going to be a conversation or a moment or a revelation that happens at 45, and so he's got to keep me alive until then, what if I want to take my own life? What if I step in front of a bus? does he not allow me to do that? Is it just not something that's going to organically come up? And I started to like play it out and see what that would look like. And then to that degree, if God's going to interfere, if that's how this all gets solved, then we don't have the free will that is requisite to deal with the problem of evil and suffering, which is what the other apologist told me when I also am deconstructing because of my problem of evil and suffering. Well, it had to happen because God had to give us free will, but he also has to interfere to get me back because it's his ultimate plan. And that's one small example of like, when you have so many issues with the religion and there's so many answers, they throw the kitchen sink at you and wait for the one to stick. The things that do stick or could stick, they're mutually exclusive from each other. And I think that, you know, in any given individual conversation or individual book that you read or conversation that you have or someone in your life that gives you something that you think can solve this one issue, it immediately doesn't work with this other one. And that happened to me so much. Like I could give you 50 examples off the top of my head of that incongruency where you start to like not want to look anymore. And it's not putting your head in the sand. It's, I have looked, I have come to a conclusion, and you are just trying to catch up on this one issue. And as you do that, it makes a bigger issue over here. And when you see that happen enough, you just start to wonder, I don't know with how much I know now if I ever could get back. I'm willing to believe, and I believe that if there is an all-powerful God, he could get me to believe.
Right.
But you and I know, like from Francesca Stavrakopoulos, like we're both big fans of that book. We have an understanding of how some of this evolved and some of the true origins. That's going to have to be answered for before we can ever get to Jesus being the savior of the world, because it's still tied to this. And that's something that a lot of Christians who hear our stories in our doubt and our deconversion don't understand is like, they don't know some of the things genuinely that like we know. And again, we could be wrong and there could be something that comes out that helps me not believe that anymore and opens up a new avenue, but there's 1,000 of them. And for one person to be able to reconcile all of that, or one experience to reconcile all of that, I'm pretty doubtful that there's this Christian God because of all of those things. So I don't ever want to be disingenuous and be like, yes, I would absolutely believe, I'm willing to come back. Like that's my intention. Because I do want to follow truth. But there has to be a point where sometimes you can truly know something. And one of the things I feel I truly know is that this God is falsifiable and has been falsified. So, you know, just to be clear.
Yeah, there's so much you said there. Whew,
sorry, that's
no. There's episodes on episodes of ideas that could be drawn out from that. Your point about the one idea causing a problem for another one, making it almost exclusive, like they're two contrary ideas that come in. At the end of my journey as a PCA member, I was part of the Calvinist Presbyterian, much more conservative form of Presbyterians. So we were like kind of the offshoot family of Puritans in a way. Women in our church wore head coverings.
Wow.
They're pretty serious about, you know, obeying the text of what we
just
see.
Following scripture. It sounds crazy, but that's just straight from Paul. So it's like,
you know,
but anyways.
Yeah, it's Christianity, literally. Yeah. It's in the text. And if your women aren't wearing head coverings, watch out, because the fallen
tempting the angels.
Yeah, they might find them attractive and hunt them down. And he gives that implication. But this idea about, you're talking about this omni God, continuously mentioning this omni God, omniscient, omnibenevolent. I had to struggle even in Christianity. So they're like, if I were describing, yes, I was devout and a believer, but I feel like my deconversion happened long before I said, you know, I don't believe. Because yes, I stopped believing in certain things about God. And in different ways, I had to form and adjust my theology to make sense of the problem of evil, the text of the Bible. I had finally come to a position where I had to do kind of a Calvinistic reading. And then you get to this problem of evil. You don't have to keep making excuses with free will. You go, everything is controlled by God. Even Calvinists are disputing this with Calvinists. They don't like what the implications are because it's pretty hardcore. There's this idea of God having two minds, so to speak, two wills. So you have the prescriptive will, and then there's the decree will, the idea that everything that actually happens is God's will. But there's also wills where he says, man shall not do this, even though he causes all things, which always made me think God is schizophrenic in that kind of theological position or philosophical look on God, that you mean God is telling them not to do it, but then he makes them do it. And you get kind of this implication with like, go tell Pharaoh that God said, let my people go. And God hardened Pharaoh's heart. You do get this idea. For me, I wanted to stop playing games with like, what's God really doing? Because everything that happened in the real world, every single thing that happened, I came to the conclusion, God does it. He is literally causing everything to happen. We have no free will. I came to this conclusion as a believer. But I did not think there was any authentic will of God where he's literally trying to make people, hey, please let my people go, or please stop murdering, or no. What happened was God's will. And then I create good, I create evil, I, the Lord, do all these things. I had to swallow this pill. I would read Paul. Who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Does the thing formed say to its maker, why have you made me thus? So he will say, well, hold on. If God does it all, then how can he find fault? He's the one doing it. This is how I understood Paul. Now, I know that there's the context of Gentile inclusion and all that, and it gets into stuff that I wasn't looking at when I was a Christian as a Calvinist. It was really the whole free will versus Calvinism idea. But in the end, Paul's answer is not an answer. It's more of like a rebuke. Who are you, O man, to answer to God? Does a thing made say to its maker, why have you made me thus? Shut your damn mouth. Right. That's what Paul's practically saying. You are created. He is creator. He does what he wills. And in my mind, I'm going, you mean to tell me, because he goes into this like elaborate theological argument to make this point that long before they were born, God chose one and loved one and hated the other before they were even born, so that his election would stand and stuff. And I thought, you mean to tell me God loves people or hates people that I love? This was incongruent for me. Yeah. How could I love more than God? Because if he doesn't love them and I do, how does that work? How can God's love be greater than my love if I'm loving things that he isn't loving? And that didn't make me not believe. It just, there were things even in my faith that I just could not quite reconcile. Could try to swallow the pill. I tried to believe it, but it could not match what I was trying to make sense of the Bible. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. Like,
oh, for sure. And what the frustrating part of it is, and I'm sure you get it as much as I do, is I'll state an issue similar to what you just said. You know, the Esau story about being hated in the womb, and then not just that, but Edom that comes from Esau is cursed forever. You know, just under this same negligent hate for no reason. And you know, as one example, I might talk about that on the channel, and then the comments are, oh, God bad, therefore he no exist. And it's, you know, this trite little quip that's meant to say what exactly? Because no, like you said, you and I don't not believe in God because of this, but the continued evidence that the God character acts and is in such a way that is opposite of the way that he is in other times described, omnibenevolent, all-loving versus hating Esau, these things don't work together. They truly are mutually exclusive. One falsifies the other. So in a way, yeah, we can point out the immorality of the God character as continued evidence against the notion of the God that we believed in. And that was something I had to contend with. Have I just believed in the wrong version of this God? Is Christianity corrupted for some reason? Is this maybe the work of the devil? And the real God isn't all loving, nor should he be, you know? And you start to just like, I think it should be part of someone's deconstruction. I hate the word should. I think it's beneficial if it's part of someone's deconstruction to really consider if they even have the right nature of God, you know. But the Bible just screws that up for everyone because it does make claims about the nature of God. And sometimes those claims are mutually exclusive in and of themselves, but even if they're not, then we have his actions and words that don't match up. So then you move on to the next step. Okay, should I not be relying entirely on the Bible or the whole Bible? You know, just because 2 Thessalonians 3:16 says all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training, maybe it didn't know about Exodus. So you just go piece by piece by piece, which was more work than I did as a Christian, when I just devoutly believed, to try to make sure that you are being as honest and humble even as possible as you follow the breadcrumbs. And at every single point for me, it failed. That's what I meant. Like when I was really ready to face reality, it was, okay, fine, I'll jump on board. Maybe it's not a good God, but well, the Bible says he is. And you just go through the whole thing and it failed everywhere. So I hear you, man. The frustrating thing is how the critics take that and use it as some excuse about our ill intentions.
I think they helped in a way get you to a point where you end up leaving sooner. And this is a lesson, I think, for anyone who's in the faith. I think your best thing is long suffering and patience with your friends, and not to be so harsh, because I'll tell you, like I was, you're to and fro with the wind with this doctrine, Ephesians, you're going all over the place with different denominations and different theological positions. It's because I was exploring and really testing things to see what made the most sense and trying to follow what made the most sense with scripture, because scripture was my thing. And of course I viewed it univocally, which now we're in a whole different, once the bubble pops, you can actually go, hold on. There's contradictions. That's a whole thing I did not accept when I was Christian. We
had to do like a 2-step process. We had to leave fundamentalism and then leave Christianity. And it's two totally different things.
Yeah, because I didn't go from I'm a Christian to I'm an atheist. Like I didn't go there. There was a distance of several years between those that caused me to go down that path. So I want to explore that with you a little bit here. Clearly, there were questions you couldn't answer that caused you to really not be able to believe these ideas anymore. For me, part of my journey was getting into and exploring more science, because I didn't believe evolution. I believed the earth was young. Even in my latest Presbyterian position, I watched debates between different Christians who had old earth creation models versus young earth and all that kind of stuff. I watched a lot of that through the years, but I was like practically a young earth creationist 15 years ago. And I was big into that and like did not know much about science, psychology, learning from actual people who are specialists in the field, coming to a reality-based world and understanding we can look and test and measure and calculate and do all these things that can help us understand more about ourselves and the world we live in than what we did when I was just saying, the Bible says it. Now I need to make sure reality conforms to what the Bible says. That was my kind of bubble.
Yeah. No, definitely a part of it. I keep using that term, like being actually willing to face reality. And part of that was allowing myself to learn about things that I had either been interested in, but been afraid of, or just straight up avoided, because there was probably that little voice in the back of my head that said, like, if you go that far, like you're not coming back. Like I remember, just as a anecdote, during my like very early deconstruction, I read Sam Harris's The End of Faith. And one of many things that I would start to eventually allow myself to read. And I told my friend, like, hey, do you want to read this with me? My best friend, my good Christian friend. And he was still he wasn't doubting like me, but he knew I was doubting, so he came along for the ride. But before he did, he prayed to God, first for permission to read it, and then second, that God would protect his heart. And I was early enough in my doubting or I was at least far enough in my doubting that I remember thinking, why would I get wanting maybe to get permission before you read something that to you is essentially satanic, but why would God have to guard your heart? Right? Like, these things are either true in this book or they're not true. We can investigate what we read. We can map it up with other things and see if it holds water, if those facts that are presented are true or not true. And I started, that was like just a memory that I have of the layers, the levels coming out a little bit of like, wow, look at how much we do to protect our own belief. And I remember even before reading the book, that experience was probably more damning for me than anything, because it showed me what had been true about me previously too, that I was scared. I was scared to hear other people's opinions. I was scared to hear science. I was scared to understand psychology better. And as a big reader, I actually did read a lot of things that, and just credence or credit to my indoctrination, because they didn't faze me. I just thought the devil, falsehood, an agenda, we're being deceived on purpose, evil scientist, whatever, all the excuses. Like you, I believed in a lot of fundamentalist, ridiculous things, young earth, anti-evolution, Noah's Ark literally happening way too long, embarrassingly long, especially for how otherwise like intelligent, educated, rational I would have considered myself even as a Christian. But that's just the power of this reinforcement. So yeah, I started reading everything I could get my hands on once I allowed myself to. And one of the big ones for me was Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True. I read it. I was presented with the facts, and they were facts. I could go investigate every claim that was made in that book, which I literally did. I had notebooks because it was my first time being introduced to the concept of evolution. And I was like, there's no argument here. So all I can do is go back and figure out how to make this mesh with Christianity, which I did for a while. I forget the name of the book, but there was a book where someone explained Adam and Eve are just the most, the tip of evolution from our ape cousin ancestors, where they first get imbued with a soul. And that's what actually Genesis is mentioning when they breathe the breath of God in. And there's ways to make this stuff work. And there's other ways to make it work, of course. And there's plenty of Christians that don't believe in a global flood or young earth, or they accept evolution. There's plenty. And so, then you rest there for a minute. You're like, okay, at least there's still this truth, but it just continued to evaporate the more and more that I learned.
There's so much you said there. I mean, again, it wasn't all science. It started to become that. I think for me, I went from, and I've got a little poem. If you haven't heard it, I'm sure you have. There's some viewers who may not have. From Devout Fundamentalist, I stopped going to church every day and was taking my own research into my own hands from studying and learning online. And I started to come across comparative mythology. Of course, MythVision, clearly I titled my channel because of myth playing such a significant role, because I didn't go, oh my gosh, the Bible has myth in it, there's no God. That's not that's not what happened. What happened was God got bigger.
Yeah.
So I had a friend, I think I've told this kind of briefly in one of my little deconversion videos that I made a movie on, where he introduced this idea of comparing Samson and Hercules.
Mm-hmm.
One is okay. One is evil, demonic, and from that pagan world. But I never really had anything like an axe to grind against Heracles or Hercules. It's just, that's myth. No. Samson, bona fide history, actually happened on a Wednesday night at 7:43 p.m. when Delilah cut his hair. Oh, Heracles, 12 labors, BS, didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing some comparison and was taking it serious from people who were in mystical circles. They were mystics, much more esoteric. They found allegory and metaphor, meaning and power and myth. And I still to this day find value in myth and meaning and all of that in these stories. However, I just don't ontologically take it and try to go with some there's something metaphysical happening here that's a deity right now. But that transition took me to one of the poems that helped play a part in my deconversion is The Blind Man and the Elephant. You've probably read this 1,000 times.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Should I read this for the audience?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it was 6 wise men of Hindustan to learning much inclined. I think it's Hindustan in different texts, but anyway, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy the mind. So you have these blind guys going to the elephant. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is nothing but a wall. And the other way that they worded this in the older poem is different. I'm not going to read all these, but all 6 of them touch the elephant in different places and have a different interpretation of what the elephant is, what it is. And at the end, it says, and so these men, so 6 no sooner had begun, boom. And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. So often theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, tread on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. Brandon, for me, God, what happened in my mind as I was a staunch believer, this was if we were talking about The Hobbit, that one chink in the dragon's armor, that one spot where you can penetrate the dragon's impenetrable armor and get it. This was the Achilles heel for me. Once I realized these stories may not have literally happened, the freedom I felt and the liberty and interesting ways of interpreting this material in comparison to other stories that I had no problem doing that with, there was something psychological for me to go, oh, this is a powerful story and a lesson. It's not like I needed this to have literally happened. I actually could free myself from the bondage of literalism and explore text, and even was willing eventually. I wouldn't do it with Jesus yet, but eventually I was able to go to Jesus and see, is there something here that is also doing that? I believed in God as I did this. God got bigger because what it told me in my mind, the way I interpreted this was God was actually showing himself or itself in these other religions, these patterns that were coming up showing similarities, overlaps, at least common lessons and stuff, was God, and we're all the blind men, and God is the elephant. And oh well, Hindus just they discuss it in billions of gods, and it looks like this. And you know, the Muslims, they'd say this, and you know, the list goes on and on with the different holy books and texts and stories. So God got bigger, and I didn't have like a category, maybe pantheism, where I expanded my thinking to more of a mystic who thought God's trying to talk to all of us, and I no longer had those barriers where Jesus is the only one. That was maybe good for Jews in the first century, but like apart from that, it was almost Baha'i faith in a way. Like all religions are kind of trying to tell us the truth in a way. They partly get the truth, but partly wrong. And when I went down that path after a while, the God that got bigger, the concept got bigger. It really was inclusive of all cultures and religions and non-religions, to a point where he had no power over my psychology and over how I lived. And there was no trauma. So like people could come to this conclusion and not have the dogma.
Yes.
Like I could get people who believe, but they're not dogmatic. And there was so much freedom in that I fell in love with mythology. And I think it was learning more about science and other things that started to make me more of an atheist, I'm not so sure there is any God. But
so were you a deist for a while, just in general, after your deconversion from Christianity, or it just was just this other thing until eventually it was nothing?
I had too much experience, like in my own, like deists typically kind of have this idea that God created and walked away. The universe is like set up, natural laws, and then disappears, almost has no personal interaction or inclusion in your life. And that's my understanding. It may be a straw man. I don't know. Maybe some deists are in the chat who can correct that. But I felt that there was a personal, I know why you could ask me that, but like, I still felt there was something personal. Like I had this spirit, so to speak, and I was still connected to that larger thing. I just didn't have any of the baggage that I needed from the dogma and doctrines of Christianity with it. And so the way I would describe that from there was, I've told my sister, my mom, they're like, why don't you believe anymore? What is talk? You know, we had open conversations about this, and it's like I went over the hills. I told this to Elaine Pagels just day before yesterday. I interviewed her on the Gnostic Gospels, and she goes, "That's actually the secret teachings that the Gnostic." You'll have to watch the episode when it comes out, but went on the hills of like learning these ideas, and at the end there was a mirror, and I saw my own reflection, and it was like, oh. It was you all along. And it was like I come to that kind of understanding. So that personal relationship that I had with Jesus that was so deep and profound was really it never left. It was always there because it was me. The 2 footprints in the sand you saw that carried you when you couldn't, that was me. That was my wife, my family, the loved ones around me. I no longer said it was Jesus. It was me. So I knew Jesus, but I just called him Jesus. It was really me all along. And it was me in my mind, of course. And I would attribute it to Christ. But man, it was like this profound kind of, I found myself.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, although I might have taken a slightly separate path because I too, even as a Christian, I loved mythology. Like I was geeked out about Greek and specifically Egyptian mythology and later on Japanese mythology. And there was so much to learn. There were so many good lessons. There were still these, to be very Jungian about it, these archetypes. There's only so many narratives or plots out there. And I appreciated it for what it was. In fact, before Jordan Peterson ever even got famous, he had the book in 1995, Maps of Meaning, that I actually read as a Christian. And then when I started deconstructing, without knowing about like 12 Rules for Life or any of the like new Jordan Peterson, it was kind of this little segue for me of like, because at that time he was still just making meaning out of ancient tradition or an oral teaching and these larger than life figures and archetypes and mapping that onto the stories of the Old Testament. And when I was first letting go of Christianity and thinking like maybe I just got it wrong, I kind of fell into that maps of meaning interpretation of there is something we don't understand. There are these powerful things that navigate through all our life. This thing that it is to be human is very universal, and we experience things, we just label them differently, yada, yada, yada. And I started to really appreciate for a while there, even the Bible in a different way than I had previously as literal truth. Like you drop the literalism and you can almost start to get more from it. And I saw wisdom and I saw beauty, but I was also free to see how ugly it was and the weeds in the garden and the incorrect information and the harmful information. And that right there to me killed Christianity. Like, okay, maybe, and honestly really kind of killed deism because I had already been duped. I had already believed something as to its fullest extent. I had already done all the research in one of the world's most major religions and saw that it was falsifiable. And so, yeah, I could be wrong. Maybe some Hindu god is the actual creator god. Maybe there's no creator god. Maybe there's, more of a Epicurus deity, just a divine figure, the perfect ideal of perfection, but they're long gone, right? And so I started being open to that. I would have never called myself a deist, but I just thought like, until I have a reason to believe in a particular God for a particular reason, I don't need to guess at this. If there's not a personal God that wants a personal relationship with me and is actually going to show up in the way that anyone else has a personal relationship with someone, I don't need to keep building bridges for invisible, non-existent, non-responding deities. And so I was able to swing my pendulum really far, really fast once I finally took that final leap, if you will. Yeah. But I'm not coming back to the middle or anything, but I have recognized, in fact, I had a great conversation with Britt Hartley from No Nonsense Spirituality about, okay, it's fine, correct, pendulum is here, but what is it that religion evolved along with us for? That it was so useful for, that these myths have been useful for throughout all of time, that we might be losing in such a staunch atheistic position. That doesn't mean I should just make believe a God to make myself feel better. It doesn't mean that I should just worship something to have that sense of ritual and pride. Nope. But what can we do as humans, physically, tangibly, in reality, understanding our psychology and the science around the world to still not let the human condition down? And so that's been my newest point of interest that stems from mythology, which is so cool. Yeah, we both have that love, but I think it's manifested itself in slightly different ways.
Definitely love what you said there. I mean, I'm at a point where I love the mythology and lessons that can come from these stories where, while we don't draw ontological conclusions based off of these things, technically, what is their pragmatic or practical use in the world? What application do they have that we might need as humans? Is it inherent for us to tell stories? And it's really interesting hearing some of the atheists in the world who hate the Bible. They're just, clearly they want to be critical because they're usually combating the extreme fundamentalist. And I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's easy to get caught in that. And then now you just have to completely only just be absolutely critical of this book. And we have plenty of reasons to do so. Okay. It's been weaponized. It's been used. It's got a lot of issues with it. But at the same time, I read all of these other stories from other myths, other epics, other poems, you name it, and there's some pretty backwards morality in those
Yeah.
as well. And I clearly don't have the same axe to grind because there's no people weaponizing it or out here
That's
using.
the big difference.
That's the big
100%.
difference. Yeah. I think that you and I find value though in this and are trying our best. Some days I want to call myself a mystical atheist. And I don't mean it as if there's some metaphysical thing going on, but like someone who wants to purposely indulge in the narrative, who wants to embrace the mythology in some way and enjoy it and not just debunk and discredit, because that's easy to do. It's obvious, but can we go beyond that? I don't laugh at Lord of the Rings. I'm not laughing at these purposeful fictions. Once I know they're purposeful fictions, can you now reevaluate them in a different
Right.
way, in different light? It's hard when you're combating pretty harmful ideas by people who are weaponizing it, and yet just trying to be a champion of the material for what kind of material it is. It's real difficult.
I often think we'll have to just wait, and unfortunately, we won't be around. But in 300 years or 1,000, whatever it takes, where Christianity is at the same level as Greek mythology, and it isn't weaponized, it isn't part of the political sphere. There aren't people that are literally orienting their life around it and demanding that others do so in a similar fashion, or else I think then we can play with it in the freedom that that we enjoy with the other myths that you and I talk about all the time. It's funny, like even on my channel, I've started doing like more of a Thinking Thursday and covering great thinkers. And I just did the story of Hypatia from Alexandria, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Some of that. Yeah.
And you know what? I know there's some legend in there. And I try to be clear that like, hey, like I'm reporting as it was reported and some of these things, but I gave the full legend, right? And like, I don't have to believe in Hypatia for my salvation. And if I'm wrong about her, or I'm wrong about Alexander, this is kind of a common atheist quip, but I think it's really true. So what? You know, if I'm not using it to like put someone in jail or control what laws are passed or telling them they're going to burn if they get a detail wrong,
Yeah.
I don't want to be purposeful. Like, I don't want to be ignorant. I don't want to spread a lie. But I can enjoy the full essence of the story of Hypatia and what she stands for, even if a couple things were exaggerated over time, because I'm not claiming that it's perfect truth. While people are still claiming that the God of Abraham and his son Jesus are the only God and the perfect way, light, truth, etc., you can't do that. And I actually think it's really unfortunate. I think there are some really cool things about Jesus. Like if Christianity had never happened and Jesus was like a philosopher like Plato, and we could talk about him like Plato, and we could talk about the good and the bad and the lessons to be learned and what part we should apply to our life today,
Yeah.
awesome. But I almost feel like because Christianity is taken as perfect truth or claimed as perfect truth, we can't do that with Jesus in the way that we ideally could or should, because we have to fight the other side of the narrative. Like we're put in a position where we have to show that it's harmful and not true. But I just crave the day when all the religions are viewed the same for what they are, which is ancient mythology that can be useful in its proper time and place and understanding. But right now we can't do that with Christianity. And I just think it's a bummer because there's a ton of stuff about it I do like and that I do think works and is beneficial, but you can't have it both ways right now is kind of my thought process.
It's hard. Yeah, I'm trying to do both. I'm trying. And there's a tug of war. It's super stressful. Like it honestly is very stressful because you got stories of Jesus literally performing miracles with 6 pots in John 2. And I'm like, okay, well, Dionysus did this centuries before with 3 pots. They're made of copper instead of clay because Jews would have used clay. And of course, if you're writing a story with Jews involved, it's unlikely you're going to use copper. And he ends up filling Dionysus by the next morning, fills these 3 empty vases with wine. He is the God who is clearly miraculously transforming rivers and streams and you name it. The list goes on and on. I showed many sources, right? And then you get to John and it's like, oh no, they need this to have happened. I forgot.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but clearly even many scholars, even Christian academics like Rudolf Bultmann, who wrote, this is back in the day, and many since then echo that this is heathen legend. They use the word heathen. I don't know if they mean that a good way or bad way. Either way, I know some people embrace it and some people hate it, but that it comes from Dionysus. And I'm like, okay, clearly there's no Jewish antecedent to express that idea, though they are spinning it into a Jewish context of saying maybe this is like he is like symbolizing the resurrection, the wine represents the Eucharist and his death. Like there's all sorts of interesting things, and that he is bringing in the new covenant. The old wineskins are going away, and here's the new. There's all sorts of stuff that you can interpret that way. Your point is a really good one, because you have such a powerful system today of people who believe this and want to literalize their entire agenda. I wish we had 1,000 more channels like ours, like yours and mine on YouTube, and we had a system and a community that works and cooperates, like Mike Winger and Inspiring Philosophy, and then like the 18 other apologetic channels who find ways to like give each other those kind of boosts. And here we are trying to do that right now from the critical side, that's trying to break down those walls, those barriers that divide us, and try to create a more humanistic picture that shows, hey, we have a lot more in common than you're trying to give, a narrative to that isn't that. And
yeah,
it's a pain in the butt.
it is. And it's, for a while there, when I first started doing this, and I kind of took a typical route, and I still do some of the like reaction videos. Like I have Tuesdays that are always reaction videos. That's what today's was. And I think that for a while I struggled with it. Always just seemed negative. It seemed like I was taking away. It seemed like I was talking about what isn't there or what's wrong. And I was almost jealous of the Christian apologists that get to constantly preach hope and love and eternal bliss and paradise and things like this. But it's simply the nature of the game that the counter to those things when they're not true is having to show why they're not true, which is taken away, and why they're harmful, which is negative. But in the last year, I tried to at least balance that with the positive of community still, and rationality, and the enjoyment from science, and the pleasure from myth, and these things that can still do so much for us. And I've seen, the first time that I messaged you and said, Kindred Spirit was that video you had right before your surgery, and you had kind of said the same thing, like, not that either of us can ever be done with like combating counter apologetics or apologetics, but you were kind of shifting mindset or gears a little bit to still be more about, I don't want to speak for you, but I believe what you had kind of communicated in that video was like, you just wants to be still about helping people and bringing a positive instead of just this reduction in this negative. And I think that's a really hard balance. And just by the nature of what we talk about on our channels, it's just not as easy to get to do it in the positive and communal and group and fun and love light that the Christian channels get to do under the pretense of.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, wow. I mean, that video that I did, Beyond Apologetics, I think I had on the thumbnail, and I'm sitting there before I had my surgery, which I still have my bandages on. Like I'm definitely still sucking. In that video, if I were to say, if someone said, tell me what you're really trying to say, what I'm trying to say is I'm always a happy, optimistic guy. Like I wake up, and rainy days sometimes make me want to stay in bed or want to watch a TV show and heat up some soup or something and get all cuddly and whatnot. But I am usually, glass is full. It might be half, but it's full. I'm a very optimistic, very happy. I love life. I love my family. I love everything that, is around in my life. I mean, if it's negative, it impacts me pretty bad. So what happens when the way I would describe my dealings with apologetics is it makes me feel dirty and icky. I feel completely like it drains me, and it makes me feel anxiety and all sorts of things towards these people. And I don't want to view them that way. I really want to empathize. And I know that they go, that's condescending and that's arrogant for you to view us in an empathetic way because you think we're trapped. You think that they are psychoanalyzing again, Derek, and assuming that we're in this toxic relationship with Jesus or whatnot. But I know what it's like if I take Jesus seriously. And I know what kind of experiences humans have from that. And I've interviewed several people like yourself who've come and vocalized these experiences. And it becomes pretty human and obvious. We share a common narrative amongst the deconversion stories. Sometimes their stories are different and the experiences are more traumatic. But in all of this, I'm looking at it going, I want to have empathy for these people, but their cognitive dissonance or something is so extreme that I think it's actually draining me when I can just say, screw having to engage them directly. I mean, look, Jay Dyer, I was on an episode I thought was going to be a friendly exchange with a guy named Andrew and Jim Bob. And I was invited by my buddy Neil from Gnostic Informant. We start having this conversation. I'm 2 hours in. I'm writing them in the private. Hey, man, I'm starving. It's 2 hours in. I really need to go get food. Can you, exit me off or say thanks for joining, whatever, because I don't want to be rude and just bounce in the middle of our stream. 2 more hours go by. I'm now like drained. I'm frustrated. Jim Bob's talking about you believe miracles because explain logic exists without using logic, kind of dumb ass statements. And I'm like, what do you, that means I believe a miracle, like using presuppositional kind of scripts and stuff that I'm not acquainted with. Then Jay Dyer pops in, right? Just to give you one example, there's tons of these kinds of encounters that you see through presups online. I'm already done. I'm like, I'm done not dealing with your bullshit. Like, it sounds like what he's saying is bullshit. I'm just calling it what it is. And so that episode ends. I'm trying to be a good sport about it. I'm already hungry. I'm ready to go. And there's like this endless chain of triggered Christians who see me do work. Jay Dyer bodied him. These kind of toxic, I guess you'd say, kind of echoes that constantly occur amongst any apologist. Even my engagement with Michael Jones, right? Inspiring philosophy.
Man. Yeah, that went
I'm sorry,
sideways.
I'm rambling here. This is like almost like we're therapy here. But Michael Jones, same thing. Like, I've shown the primary sources. I have classicists who do think that's what's implied by these sources, that the water's transforming by the presence of the deity, the same way the epiphany of Jesus was celebrated by Christians, and that the wine transformed from water in those jars in John 2. And it goes on and on. But like, they go, you got destroyed. It's this toxic tribalism. And I'm like, I feel like, let me just produce documentaries and educated scholars, bring them on and not deal with these people. That's where I feel like going.
Yeah. And no, you obviously recapped your own position better than I did, but it still came through to me where I felt like, oh yeah, I'm not the only one. And I bet most of us feel that way. The very first time I had a reaction video done from Michael Jones, I was beside myself at the bad faith and dishonesty. I really didn't expect it. I know other people are like, oh, he's just doing his thing. And I thought, this is really sad. And I don't want to engage. I don't want to go back and forth. And so instead of making the 4th reaction video to him, it was just like, forget it. And that was one of many things that changed my mind towards more of dialogue and education and not trying to deconvert the world. Is something I've been saying more recently. When I point out these issues, it's for the people that are already looking for it. People like me 6 years ago that would have done well or better to recognize this earlier and with more thorough information and communication, what I'm hoping to bring, not that I'm the only one doing it, but resources that I felt I couldn't find or didn't know. And for when people are ready for that, some people aren't ready for that. I don't think that's an excuse that you should believe something that's not true, but it's definitely an excuse not to try to force someone to believe something that's true that they don't believe is true. And so, yeah, I've changed my tune a little bit recently too, and I'm just trying to find the healthiest version of this, because doing anything online is already inherently not the healthiest thing, right? And then to be so controversial is another kind of Kipp in the negative, and then to be taken away from what people, to be criticizing what so many people believe, and not just believe, but it's their identity. And I and you and others like us can understand that. And yeah, it does give me empathy. I get mad like everyone else. I get salty like everyone else. But most of the time I'm able to just be like, oh, that was me. I would have said that. I would have made that excuse. I would have called myself out like that. And I wasn't a bad guy. I just really, really believed. And I was also trying to protect my belief. And so I'm just, I think there's healthy ways, and I wanted to at least applaud you while we were still together, that I think you're being extremely healthy in a way that even not all atheist content creators are. So, thanks for leading the charge there.
Yeah. I see what I don't want to be like. I see, look, no offense. I love all these people. I really try to get along with everybody. There's some YouTube channels I'll tune in, they're call-in shows, and I see what these conversations turn into. And I'm Definitely glad I'm not the one who has to do those conversations or even has to be involved, that they get me worked up having to be derogatory back to someone on a phone call. It's not who I am. It's not my cup of tea. I mean, I'm also someone, again, who's probably more fragile ultimately in terms of the pressures of life because of my addiction in the past and traumas, that I like to keep my plate clean. I try not to create possible enemies or try not to live my life with, trying to create, if that makes any sense, like a toxic environment. Because for me, I like copacetic, sun shining, cup of coffee in the morning, kids, let's go to Disney. Like, I'm that kind of guy. And doing this, I don't know, I'm not really good at getting toxic without like starting to get really, really angry about something or whatnot. Like, I don't know. The way I put it is I try to be a cool, copacetic guy. I'm the guy that you'd like, dude, this guy's so happy, until I am mad, until I really am angry. Then it's like, I'm the last person, you want to have to deal with, because I'm like crazy. So about you, again, I want to make this spinoff as we're exiting this discussion and we can get to the super chats. What would be the one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who's obviously watching this, hopefully with some empathy and some, what can I find myself in Brandon's story? How can I relate to what Brandon's saying here in some way? What would be your advice to someone who's going through the process of trying to expand their knowledge and coming out of fundamentalism or whatnot?
I think it would be determined off of where they're at exactly. So it's kind of hard to answer. But generally speaking, if someone still believes and they're doubting or deconstructing, which again is the main group I'm trying to help, it is just to go slow. There's no, and to keep learning. You don't need to be stagnant, but you also don't need to like rush through this. You don't have to get angry. Although it's a common, it's also okay to feel angry. Like you've been lied to, essentially. Even if it wasn't people being dishonest, you've believed something that's not true, and that is going to make you feel betrayed and angered and all. Feel your feelings, be okay with the emotion, but go slow, learn it. Because it's interesting. I wonder how you would answer this. I've been playing around with the idea of, and I'll answer your question, but I've been playing around with the idea of, is there a wrong way to deconvert? Like, if we can say Christianity is 100% false and I think harmful, or at least has the potential for harm. It doesn't harm everybody, but it has the potential for harm, and it harms enough people that there's not a net positive there. If I really believe that and someone leaves that, is there a wrong way to leave it? Is there ever someone who shouldn't leave it? And the more that I'm thinking about it, I think there are wrong ways to leave. I think you can be angry justifiably and leave and not know exactly why you stopped believing. You don't have enough maybe evidence for why you don't believe, and not so that you can convince someone else or defend yourself when your family attacks you, but so that you don't swing back, so that you're not in this constant state of stress and tension and doubting about your doubt. I would much rather, if I'm giving advice, have someone slowly go, even if I can help speed it up, but still slowly go through the process of why they're leaving, why it's not true, why it's harmful, why they should care, why, all of these things, really understand it, than someone that's like, oh yeah, that's dumb. You're right. That doesn't make sense. That is a contradiction. Christianity is not true. And 2 months later, they're back at church at some altar call feeling guilty because they haven't actually processed this. And so one piece of advice I've been giving more lately is just to slow down and give yourself the permission to bounce around and be unsure and even, relapse or whatever. Just if the goal is eventually truth, then take the wise path, instead of just the emotional one, maybe is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, you're right. That question I asked is not an easy question to really answer, because it's like, it depends. And for someone who might be in a church setting who is starting to doubt like this, they've purposely set up usually barriers for this. So, come to me, the pastor, so I can reinforce the dogma, so I can help you, comfort you into remaining where you're at, rather than allowing the freedom. A lot of them won't just allow them the freedom to explore and express. I was excommunicated for coming to a different Christian theological position, let alone thinking maybe there isn't a God or whatever, which I didn't do all that then. That was many, many years later before I started questioning God's existence. So then I would even recommend, if you're needing this time for yourself and you're questioning it, unless you have cool people in the church who are literally laid back and they're not trying to coerce you into just thinking like them, my recommendation would be to, if you can, give it a break. Give yourself a chance to back off from anyone telling you what you need to do and do some exploring yourself. If you find that the comfort of believing in an afterlife, whether or not you think it's true or not, if that somehow gives you some satisfaction in life, me or Brandon, I imagine Brandon's in the same page, go for it. Like, we understand life's hard. We understand. I just hope that any harmful stuff, or hopefully your belief in the afterlife, doesn't factor into causing you negative here in this life or neglecting things that are important here and now. I mean, there's just so much stuff. So each person's answer would be different, I imagine. But I would say give yourself a chance to breathe without anyone down your throat telling you what you need to do. Like, you need to believe this.
Yeah, and that includes even like I hate calling myself the opposition, but to Christianity, we are somewhat the opposition.
Yeah.
I think that's why COVID created so many deconverts, is people just, for the first time maybe in their life, I know this is a fact, even anecdotally from so many people that tell me in the comments, it gave them the space and allowed them, without constant reinforcement, to just actually process, to actually exist and deal with their thoughts and their questions, instead of the reason that church is weekly. I mean, it is programmed. It is reinforcement for a reason. And like you said, there are things put in place in the believer's life to make exiting hard. You know, it's not some grand conspiracy. A lot of these people, they make it hard because they really care about you and they don't want you to burn in hell. And they really believe this is the truth and the best way to live your life. Like, it's not all evil scheming. No, everyone really knows the truth, but they're trying to convince. No, most people really believe in what they believe. I've got no problem with that. And so, again, even understanding that Christians are genuine, atheists are genuine, and you need some space from both to just figure out what's, real in general, without persuasion or influence, man, take it. Go slow, keep thinking, keep learning, all the things I preach constantly.
Give other positions a chance. That would be my encouragement. Don't become stagnant. Go down a weird polytheistic path. Check out a pantheist view. Go look and expand your mind. Become a deist for a moment. Go and explore. Like, become a heretic and enjoy a little bit of something different. Life is interesting, and there's so many flavors to look. I can't say that I won't possibly one day flirt with stuff, but I can't say I'd be persuaded ontologically of some of it, but like to purposely indulge in particular things, practices. I might actually try doing Buddhism at some point, right? Or whatever. Like we don't need to stay in one place. We're human. And I think there's some real freedom in accepting that we're human and we don't have all the answers, and it's okay. But anyone who says they do have all the answers, or they have one book that has all the answers, we are suggesting you walk away from that.
Yeah.
So Brandon, this has been like, you and me are two peas in a pod here. I've got some super chats we've collected over this discussion. I don't want to be rude and like segue into that unless there's
let's do
more.
it, man.
Okay.
No, I would just say I appreciate the time we've had. I definitely want to have more time with you. We'll do some other cool projects, but yeah, let's close out with honor in the super chats.
Close out with a prayer. I'm just kidding. I'll definitely join.
It rolls off the tongue so naturally.
Oh my gosh, Shima Baba. So if you ever want to have me on, I'm totally game, and
for sure,
wherever you want to go. Deconstruction Zone again. Thank you so much. He said, "Let's collab. We cooking to do." Deconstruction Zone again. Brandon fell away because he wasn't Dunker Brethren. You need dipped 3 times face first. Justin. Thank you. I don't understand though. What's he talking about, Dunker Brethren? Do you know?
I don't know that reference, but I'm just assuming the joke is that there's no true Christian because there's always something more we could have done. That's what I'll take from it, but I'd love it explained.
Got it. I'm thinking Dunker Brethren, but you were baptized. But then again, yeah, he's probably making a joke on like, you should have done this. David Rutland, thank you so much for the super chat. Brandon and Derek, the dynamic duo of free thinking and rationality.
I'll take it. I love it.
Yeah. Superhuman Theory, thank you so much for the super chat. I wonder where Christianity would be without childhood indoctrination. And from their perspective, why would indoctrination even be necessary if all creation proclaims the truth?
This is so interesting. You know, it's something I've actually talked about a lot. First of all, the indoctrination answer is simple, right? The Bible tells you to raise your children in the way that they should go so that they will not depart. So, I mean, it's baked into the commandments there, and to love God is to obey God. So to love God is to indoctrinate your children. But I have said that without indoctrination or the adult Christians that convert from personal experience, which are two things we can point to that are psychological in nature. Like, we have answers for them. They happen in other religions. They happen in other even philosophies and politics even, that these are the reasons people believe. They have a personal experience with something or they were raised to believe it. There's really not much else. And I think that when you understand that that is the setup for all belief or identity with anything, it demotes Christianity from that one true special thing. It's like, no, it's playing the same game everybody else is. So yeah, good thought.
That's why I get caught up doing this comparative mythology stuff. And of course, they want to throw out association fallacy and all this parallelomania and stuff. And in some cases, maybe there are parallels where there's no way to prove a genetic connection, and that's totally fine. I don't give a shit about the label parallelomania because I like flirting with hypotheses, because I do think texts are communicating with other texts and likely have influence from other materials that predate them. Not saying they are, but I like to flirt with what ifs or maybe. And if it is, some of it seems pretty persuasive, but some of it maybe not so much. But what do you do when your guy is 500 years late to the party, when Asclepius is already healing the blind and raising the dead, or when Heracles is raising people from the dead in their stories? And by the way, what do? You go, oh, those are myths. The ancients did not believe Asclepius was a myth and didn't exist. The ancients believed Asclepius and Heracles, these were real people to them. They believed they were demigods who really existed. Maybe the upper educated elite may have poked holes and found that all of this is fictive and the stories about them, or questioned their existence. But it was not the common people's beliefs that these people didn't exist. And they had inscriptions, all that. What does it do when your guy is not the only guy who's healing? Your guy's not the only guy who's a logos. Your guy's not the only one who's a creator. Your guy's not the only one walking on water or floating up in a cloud. Your guy's not the only one who comes back from the dead. Your guy's not the only one who actually gives immortality and forgives sins. Orpheus Dionysus. I'm going through mystery stuff right now. Oh my gosh. Like, your guy's not the only one who has a catabasis and brings people back from the underworld, saving the souls from the underworld. This is also an Orpheus Dionysian stories. Jesus has the same stuff. Like, what happens when that happens? Well, mine's is true, and those are demonic imitations. If you take Justin Martyr, modern apologists do clever different tricks, and I think it should at least go, why do I think this and deny that? And I think indoctrination and these kind of, I was raised or I had an experience in this setting with this cultural baggage, that's why I favor this one versus what this other group experiences in Hinduism or any other kind of mystical personal relationship religion or whatnot.
Comparative religion is such an answer. I mean, if you could remove indoctrination, which you never will, one way to fight it would be for some like mandatory school comparative religion, just as the littlest hope against it. Because man, it is so awakening when you really do see the similarities. And even if it is just the parallels like you're talking about, it still removes all the claims of uniqueness. I mean, I was told my whole life before I knew better that one of the reasons we could know that this is true about Jesus is because, or that the religion of Christianity was true, is because Jesus is the only one that did this. It's the only religion where it works like this, where it's not about what you do, it's about what someone else did. And even that's like first untrue, and then also like not a good thing. So it is, it's wild, but I'll stop on this.
There's so much there that you just said. Let's keep going, because we'll never get off, and I don't want to keep you too long. Deconstruction Zone again, Justin, go subscribe to these people if you want to stay, if you don't want to go to hell. That's because they love you. So the proper prayer nomenclature is Abba, Father, Daddy, Papa, if you want your prayer answered.
So you were doing it wrong when you prayed to the Holy Spirit. He's correcting you here. Yeah.
I was wrong, Justin.
I also saw someone in the chat. I didn't see it. It flew by too fast, but someone did explain what Dunker Brethren is. And I think it was not what we thought. I think there's an actual He's too smart for us. Justin knows something we don't. It went by too fast, but it looked like a good answer.
If you see it again, if someone wants to take the time to comment and explain what Dunker Brethren is, please fill us in. We're not initiated to that level of initiation. Michael Beverly in the house. Go subscribe to Michael Beverly as well. Love you both. Gotta run. Recording with a scholar in a bit. Doing my part in the deconstruction space. Hopefully helping some folks. Question: best YouTube beard?
Ever since I shaved my big beard, Michael's been trying to take the mantle from me. So I think we can give it to him. He's got some great glory going on.
All right, you got some glory, Michael. I'll give it to you. You know who else has a pretty killer wicked beard? Joshua Bowen. And Digital Hammurabi says, neither of you were real Christians.
Got us.
Josh, always coming in with the smart comments. Superhuman theory again. Jesus after resurrection. Quote, go tell all the nations the good news. They must believe in me. Their eternal soul is at stake. Anyway, I'll see you. Flies away.
You know, I used to think it was a silly question when there's a lot of atheist quips that are so valid, but because of the way that they're presented, the Christian mocks them so quickly. But one of the things that I think is super valid, and essentially what this is saying is, why send your son to earth for 33 years? Why not Jesus stick around? He stuck around for 40 days. Why not 60 days? Why not 2 years? If not 2 years, why not 60 years? Why not show you're immortal? Right? Like and of course, those are, kind of answers from silence, and it doesn't eradicate the God, but you can do it enough with so many things, kind of like, I know we've both talked about why Jesus didn't write anything down, that it's like, oh, these are legitimate questions, at least what you might expect from an all-perfect God who actually says that they desire that none should be lost. Like, maybe we would expect things differently. Doesn't mean they have to, doesn't mean they're not real, but they're awesome questions, and I really hate how Christians just scoff at them. But
yeah, I heard someone posted a comment I saw somewhere where they said, why didn't he just remain here, revealing and making himself visible since he came to earth, right? Like since he was born or whatever, and just stayed here and was able to go around and like show himself and give teachings and continue to give teachings. Why is it that he has to go somewhere else where you can't falsify or even know? Like it's a good question, and this brings me back to the doubting Thomas tradition in John, which I'm going to get into with Elaine Pagels even more because she's so fascinating. But I think he breaks the fourth wall. I've said this a lot on the channel. I think he turns to you because he's now debunking Thomas's doubt. Oh, you see and you feel and you know, but blessed are those who don't. And he's like pointing at you, the reader.
Yeah. It's one of the most actual corrupt parts of Jesus's teaching, I think. It doesn't get talked about enough. I've recently been kind of diving into that whole Thomas scene. And because people always say, no, like, look at all the evidence. God wants you to know him. He wants you to believe. He gave Jesus to us for a reason. Even Jesus is saying right there, like, better to believe without evidence, which is got to be the most backward advice of a God that actually created everything. But I digress.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Wait a minute. What? I appreciate the honesty of both your channels. Cool name. Thank you. Hang Fashi. I am an atheist who loves myth. Campbell once said, myth is a public dream and dreams are private myths. He also said, taking myths literally is like eating a menu that lists steak and thinking you're enjoying a ribeye. Interesting. Yeah, I love myth, man. I love myth. I love just as long as we know what we're talking about here, then we're good. Clearly where we came from wasn't the best for us. Epicurus of Samos, great name. Shout out to Brandon, moving humanity forward.
Always too kind, but yeah, what a great name.
Serious. And he's the famous, he has that famous dilemma about God.
The trilemma. Yeah.
Trilemma. Hang Fashi again. We now have a White House faith office, the head of which believes in literal demonic networks, chats in tongues, and all kinds of bullshit. You guys' work is more important now more than ever.
It is interesting what's happening right now. You know, I've talked before. I had a talk with Christy Burke about whether us in the atheist counter-apologetic space should be political or not. And I have no problem with anyone that is. I personally haven't so far because it's not my main goal. But man, the way things are going, it is just more proof of the pudding of how powerful and harmful this religion can be, the things that have been happening recently. So I appreciate that. I think that, yes, even if a lot of people have, I'll just take a second. A lot of people have criticized me for not being more political, but if I can help someone, just one person, think a bit more rationally and use a bit more logic and reason, I think it's going to transfer. And so I'm going to stick in my lane for right now, but I get it. I get the outcry for sure.
I agree. I think that's the start, because I'll tell you, it's kind of like the Hitchens and the Dawkins. I used to hate them. They were too harsh, too blunt. And believe it or not, I've noticed in the 5 years of doing YouTube, you make quicker enemies by going into political areas than you do saying Jesus may not have existed. So what I'm saying is, if you're trying to reach people on the other side of the aisle, which, by the way, you're going to drop social, political, ideas no matter what, as we talk about this. Oh, we're talking against misogyny or whatever. Like those are, it's going to overlap. But if you can get people to start thinking, slowly start becoming more rational or thinking through some of these issues, they will start changing their minds, like I did. I mean, it's just part of the process. I think that that's what's going to happen, but some people want to do that. I don't look, I have nothing against them making those choices for their channels. I hope they don't do the same for me and try to tell me what I should do. That's another thing, though. I'm trying to be very careful with MythVision, is I don't want to be part of a group think of everything everyone else says and does. I must do and follow in line, or I'm not. Hey, if I'm not part of that community because you want to do that, I think that says more about you and what you guys are up to than it is about what I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to be careful and get as many people on any and all sides of the aisle to come to start realizing this, because I think they'll start realizing the implications of misogyny and patriarchal stuff that's built into these religions and socially for millennia. I mean, there's a lot that we are unraveling by unraveling the myths, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, man. Okay, Epicurus is back again. How do you comfort someone who denied various pleasures out of the fear of hell? What now? My wife is still a Christian, by the way. I know the struggle.
How do you comfort someone who denied various pleasures out of the fear of hell? I think in general, a lot of people, from whatever belief system they had growing up during their formative years, they either missed out or they, and by the way, I don't believe that the opposite of like religion is hedonism or anything. I still believe in moderation. I still believe in health and well-being, but I was robbed of many things, whether you want to call them pleasure or not, that I could have experienced, that are fine to experience, that there's nothing wrong with, because I was told it's sin. And that's just a fact of my life. I was 30 years late to certain understandings. There's also pros from how I was raised. And so I think that reducing it down to human experience, that we all grew up in a way where we missed out or didn't do something or did something because of what we thought or believed or the parents that we had, that's just a fact. I'm just about now and the future. So my advice would always be acknowledge it. It sucks. Vent about it. Grieve it. But if you know better now, like now's the time, and we only get this one life. So that's my idea around it.
Yeah, I would, that's a hard one. So they denied various pleasures out of the fear of hell. And the question I would have is, are they still believing that hell's a thing? Is that like a fossil in their thinking? Because you might need therapy. You might need to go talk to someone. I know a guy who I'll never name, but like reaches out to me all the time and goes, but what if spirits are real? What if demons are real? What if, and like it's unfortunate they keep coming back to this. And they even go back to like material from the other side that's like, well, this apologist said this, and what if that's true? And I have to give them critical arguments back. And it's sad to watch over the last few years. It's been 2 years and they're still like going into this almost repetitive thing. They're stuck and trapped in a cycle of fear about hell. So I'd always recommend like seek professional help. That's my personal.
Yeah, I mean, even today on my video, I talked about cognitive behavioral therapy and how powerful it is. And one of the things I hate when we say stuff like that is people will have a negative experience with it and be like, ah, no, it's bad. And yeah, there's probably bad counselors and there's bad everything. And you can make the same argument about how Christianity works sometimes and doesn't work for people. But in general, there are real tools, and you are not the first person that has gone through how to get rid of the fear of hell. And as someone who that held on in me longer than probably anything else from the religion, that was the big what if, that was the big what if I'm wrong. I can't even begin to tell you the clarity and certainty I have that I'm not going to hell. And so, even
Mhm.
my personal example, without giving you how or the details or go see this particular counselor, it is possible. It does take time. Back to my go slow and keep learning. I would just continue to tell people not to just get stuck. Just keep learning about why these things don't work, why it's clearly man made. But again, I'm going on a
Yeah.
lot on these answers.
Thank you. Um, Marco Antonio Morales Cruz, thank you for the super chat. How can you explain cancer healings and miracles?
I'm sure we both have a similar answer. You want to take this one?
Well, so obviously I question whether or not a miracle happened, right? There's so many possibilities of things that occur. Sometimes doctors may not even diagnose or get the proper kind of diagnosis for what's actually there or how far something is. There's also natural reasons why people might, slowly have their cancer go away. The other thing is, and because I do my comparative stuff, which this gets out of the modern sphere, so to speak, of like modern miracles, because these miracles, by the way, are still happening in other religions. These aren't just Christian miracles. We're talking Hinduism. You can find it in forms of Islam that have a more mystical side of healings and stuff that are attributed. Sheiks. There's all sorts of different religions that have miracles happening in the name of their religion, their God, etc. How do you explain that? Oh, well, those are demons. Oh, okay. So now we get the funny little, I'm just being funny here, but I'm making a point. But actually, this is kind of ironic. This question comes up because I was reading a paper about the Epidaurian inscriptions. We have 4 remaining, but Pausanias in the 2nd century mentioned there was 12. We have 70 miracles of Asclepius healing. One dude had a spear in his jaw, went in, fell asleep in the temple. The god ends up healing him. He walks out with a spear in his hand, face fully healed. Like, and this happens over and over. Eyeballs, like one guy's born without eyeballs in his socket. He goes in, comes out with eyeballs in his socket, and can see perfectly fine. Like miracles that outdo Jesus in many ways. Well, there's 2 camps of scholars. I was reading one that literally interprets all those inscriptions, and this lady believes that these miracles by Asclepius are real, that Asclepius really did these miracles. The other camp of scholars who read it literally say these are fabricated inscriptions to make people come pay the priest and to fund the temple so that they would come and like keep their position as priest, and they would have these little inscriptions on the walls that would say that they were actually healed. Okay. So even among scholars to this day on Asclepius, not Jesus, you're going to have some that say they're making it up. They're making up stories about it and it didn't really happen. And then some who really believe everything that they say. Then you have some who go, maybe Jesus was a trickster, kind of like you might see someone on the side of the road who's like pulling a stunt, or a pastor on stage who makes your leg longer and extends because one leg's shorter than the other or whatever. He might have been a really good trickster in the ancient world. Who knows? I don't know what the answer is here. I just know that many people have done this, and it's not unique that it's just Jesus is the most popular religion right now. And maybe another one replaces it one day. Who knows? Sorry, that's my answer particularly.
Yeah, I mean, I won't go on so long as I have been, but I would encourage you to, like, even Holy Kool-Aid had an incredible series on faith healings and how they have been debunked. I know that for a long time when I was deconverting, this was something that I held on to, like, again, the miraculous, and even specifically with cancer healings. I just did a video on cancer about 2 months ago, and I looked up a ton of the claimed cancer healings, and there's so much to understand. There's spontaneous remission that, of course, if you're a Christian, you're going to attribute to your God. The other 90% of the time, though, someone dies from that cancer or the cancer doesn't go into remission? And do you still give credit to the God? So you have to take it all the way, just like you do with comparative religion. Either these things exist in the world and all these gods are real and all the accounts have ever been real, or if you believe any of the accounts in these other religions can be faked or have been caused psychologically or etc., then that's also needs to be a possibility for Jesus. And so I think there's so many different ways, but there's a few ways that you can start thinking about it differently.
Yeah, I thought about that too, because Caleb Jackson, a buddy of mine who's Christian, he wants to use the modern miracle argument to try and convince people, because he realizes that like an ancient book that mentions things isn't as solid as modern miracles, right? Well, I'm wondering if anyone's put together a really solid debunking of modern miracle cases, or in some way gave better plausible explanations. But it's, to me, I would say to this person, I'd be like, if you're already coming from a skeptical outlook, just like Apology is trying to do a naturalist take on the New Testament, or finding plausible naturalist explanations for what we find in the New Testament, how did the resurrection myth end up getting spread, etc. Like, there are many, in case someone who might be a believer here and doesn't know this, there are many plausible explanations that are alternatives to he really rose from the dead and it's an actual miracle. And when you actually go to factor those in, if you apply that to cancer healings or miracles or whatever, like, for all we know, maybe placebo helps impact brain activity that causes you to stimulate, particular areas to healings. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Like, there's just so many options. And I wouldn't sit here and just act like that's the case. Now, if I saw someone's arm was missing and I knew they did not have an arm, and just like the gospel said, in the name of, and his arm appeared, I would want to question my own sanity for a moment. I would want to go and touch the guy's arm. You see where I'm going with this? Like, I don't see anything like that. Never have. And we've been in some pretty healing kind of churches that try to say those things are happening on a regular. Anyway. Deconstruction Zone. Dunker Brethren are Anabaptist that splintered over baptism methods.
Yep.
Thank
That's
you.
our answer. Thanks, man. Which is amazing. You know what? I'm gonna stop. I was gonna go on another diatribe about denominational issues, but let's do another one.
I think we should. Yeah, I want to come on yours, and look, I don't want to keep you too long. We didn't expect to go this long, and
let's do a few more. No, we're fine.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I want to come and hang out with you at some point. We can do all of this if you want, pre-record, or we can do another live stream. Doesn't matter. I enjoy your company. Zach, the fear of hell is used as conversion therapy for gay and trans people. You waste living your life in misery for something that doesn't exist.
I need to read it again here.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time with that one. Sorry, Zach. Trying to conversion therapy for gay. Yeah, they're trying to like force people to become something that they're not naturally expressing. So
I mean, I think hell's more than that. I know people like to apply it to the political topics of the day, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the fear of hell is a tool in general for control and for group coercion and group think. So I think that you can apply it any way you want. I'm not sure of the second part, if he's agreeing or criticizing with us. You waste living your life in misery for something that. Oh no, for sure. Yeah. Yes, it's unfortunate. Hell is a thief. It's a not real thief, and it just sucks. It takes so much from so many people, and it's doing its job. It's why it's there. Religion uses pros and cons. It uses the carrot and the stick. That's why you have heaven and hell, and it is effective. But it's a man-made tool, and it's great to understand that.
I couldn't say it better. Thank you. Joseph Fullman, I have very recently deconstructed. Would it be possible to come on one of your channels to tell my story? If so, how can you be contacted? Joseph, thanks for the super chat. So I'm going to put my email here. I don't know if you do. Do you do these as well?
So I have been, I've only had like a few chats so far. I want to have more. What I really want to do, and it'd be so fun to do it with someone, or at least have you guest host sometime, is that, like you, I am so tired of some of the call-in shows that are so inherently combative and negative. I just want to do one. I've got a great name for it. On the Fence. And the whole idea is you call in if you're in the middle of deconstructing or doubting, you want to share your story, if you've got a question. It's more positive focused. It's about helping people. Not that there's anything wrong. Some of the other channels do great work. They help me a ton, but I'd like to just add a different flavor. So I'm waiting to do that and have a lot of conversations. As of right now, I'm not so much, but.
Yeah, I like these more personal conversations like this, what we've done. Feel free to email me, Joseph, and if you don't mind, kind of give me some background. A lot of people who are emailing me to try and make stuff like that happen will give a little bit of context about who they are, and maybe we can go from there. I like to vet and sift through and see if this is something that I want to put on the channel and go from there. But yeah, you can contact me through my email. I just put it in the chat, mythvisionpodcast@gmail.com. James Labra, forgive me. Do you have a video that covers your thoughts on the topic of the occult and astrotheology and its connections to the feast and tabernacles and its cycles?
I don't.
Clearly
That's for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't have one that actually in particularly deals with occult and astrotheology, connecting it to Feast of Tabernacles and its cycles. I have some older videos that talks about astrotheology, and I've shifted more away from that. Not saying there isn't some astrotheology in the Bible, but I've gone into more, I'd say there's more critical scholarship that I've done in terms of what I've moved into with MythVision. But I'm trying to think. John, I have an old video with Dr. John. It's an astrotheology video, but none that connect what you're talking about. I'm sorry. But I do know the importance of these particular festivities and these holidays are practical. Not all of them, but like a lot of them are universal. You'll find them all land on the similar solstices and equinoxes and stuff. It seems to be a very common human thing. And this is where the wrestle between histories of religion and then those who want to, like the anthropologists and stuff, who want to nitpick on, well, this one's so different. And then when they isolate the differences, they somehow are allergic to them having any overlap or possible shared mythos to the others because they want to find those differences about each particular movement or culture or whatever. And I try to take from both. I try to do a little bit of both. But thanks so much for the super chat. Marco is back again. Explain hell and miraculous cancel healings.
And NDEs, so near-death experiences.
Oh, NDEs. Sorry, I thought it was and.
Yeah, I mean, same thing as what we talked about before. You know what? First of all, two things on NDEs, because that's the one that's unique to this. I would say this. John MacArthur has one of actually the best answers to why NDEs are not real. He's coming from a Christian perspective, of course, and I hate most of his preaching because it's horrendous and harmful. But I'd encourage everyone to look up John MacArthur on NDEs. And then the other thing is just like the fact that everyone has them. It's a human experience. It's also near death. It's not death. And that they represent the culture they were brought into. Every once in a while, you'll have a claim of someone in Islam that on their deathbed or their near-death experience, they see Jesus, but it's also still in their cultural zeitgeist a little bit. And so, you know, when I hear of a story that there's a documented Native American in 1380 that had a near-death experience and was visited by specifically the name Jesus Christ, then we can talk about this stuff. But to me, this is just another psychological effect that has been shown to be extremely inconsistent, dubious, and not beneficial of revealing truth. Why, like, if God's going to work in this way, wait for you to like come to your final moment that's not actually your final moment to reveal something to you, but doesn't answer my prayers for 30 years for revelation, then we're back at the same problem with divine hiddenness anyways. I think there's so many holes with near-death experiences. But that's my like 1 minute elevator pitch on it.
No, I'm glad we're focusing on the one thing because we've already addressed the other two, at least briefly. And that, for me, again, I get it. There's real experiences here. Again, your brain is doing funny things. I know that I saw a video a long time ago where they had these people getting ready for jets. They're like training these military pilots to go into Mach speeds, and their faces sink and they age like 80 years, and some of them pass out. And one guy passes out and he starts like moving his body in weird ways and starts moving his arms. And then like comes to, and the guy goes, the guy who's like filming the whole thing, who's standing there like observing him, goes, you all right? He goes, dude, I was just in a fight. I was getting jumped by a bunch of people. Dude, we just watched you. You're just sitting there. You just started freaking out all of a sudden because you lost oxygen to your brain, the blood, that flows to your, and like you had an instant dream where you're like hallucinating / dream experiencing this moment where you're getting jumped. Your arms are tweaking because your body is lacking the oxygen you're supposed to get to your like. And so, therefore, you were really in another realm actually fighting people. I guess you could believe that if you wanted to. I think it's pretty comforting that these are packaged in really well polished stories to make you have hope of life after. And I think that's the goal, is to try and encourage you to believe in our particular. Because I imagine near-death experiences are happening to Hindus, like you said, or any other religion. Do they verify Vishnu? And really interesting to me is if we find the older religion, much, much older, because this used to be the argument. Moses is older than Plato and Pythagoras, and therefore he's the one who had to have taught these wise sayings and teachings and stuff. Well, what if we find religions that are far older than yours that are already experiencing and doing these things? You're just going to poo-poo them anyway. You're going to do like Justin Martyr and go, yeah. So Jesus looks like the sons of Zeus and Dionysus being torn into pieces and virgin birth like Perseus and all these gods. But those are devilish imitations. Even Satan and the demons knew long ago about the prophecies of Scripture. So they crafted these religions to sway people away from the truth. That's how far they're willing to go to deny any of these earlier stories, instead of saying early Christians grew up in a zeitgeist where these are the well-known stories and modeled their guy after it. The most simplest explanation. So anyway, it doesn't debunk near deaths, but I like your point. They're not dead. They're clearly going through something and they're alive still. Anyway, Edgar, thank you for the super chat. Do you believe in Christ's connection to psychedelics?
I think there's two things this could mean. I think one is that there is the idea that religion in general was just a bunch of people, like John on the Isle of Patmos or Paul on the road to Damascus are having psychedelic experiences, and that creates religion or creates the things that make us believe in certain religions. I don't know if that's what this person means, or that psychedelics help in some gateway form, kind of like a near-death experience, to actually crossing over to the real realm. But if you mean something else than that, I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if you're talking about like the idea of the sacred mushroom and the cross or something like that. Not really sure if that's what you mean. If that's what you mean, I'm not persuaded of it. That doesn't mean that some early Christian communities possibly weren't having some sacred type of ritual drink or meal that included ingesting something that helped them get into a trance-like state. But I know, and I've had this conversation with a lot of the people that run in the veins of drugs are the only way in which they would induce themselves to seeing God or experiencing things like that. I think they were a very important part of a lot of the religious systems of the ancient world. But if you don't eat or if you don't sleep, you fast, you put yourself in particular natural situations, your body will then cause you to have experiences as well. And the Bible is like replete on talking about fasting and like causing your own body without ingesting necessarily to then have experiences and stuff. So either way you have it, you can get experiences doing such things. SMKK, I am an ex-Muslim who was looking for the truth and was drawn to Christianity. Thank you for stopping me from making another mistake. Oh, there's so many. Like, please go tell our friends David Wood and AP Apostate Prophet that one. They'll be happy to hear your. They'll be pissed. No, you need to come to our Lord and Savior Jesus. I think AP's flirting with trying out Christianity. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm glad that you're considering being skeptical and not jumping into another study, research. Joseph, the Bible is astrology and numerology. The 40 symbolizes a new life or beginning as a woman gives birth after 40 weeks, 12 tribes, 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 apostles, 12 months of the year, etc. Did you want to tackle this?
I think numerology is interesting in religion in general, and definitely the ancient Jewish writers did certain things with numbers on purpose. I wouldn't go any further than that. Does 12 work as some sign of completion? Is 40 associated with testing and trials, like Jesus is fasting in the 40 years in the wilderness? Yeah, for sure. If anything, I think that maybe Derek, you had the same realization when we both dropped the literal part. We were able to see some of these stories more for what they were. It could have been 39 years. It could have never happened. It could have been 82 years, but it says it's 40 because it's trying to make a point. And I don't think that proves anything. I think that just shows the agenda within the text. I know some people are big on numerology in general, that there's something mystical or magical happening with numbers as opposed to just symbolism are two different things. But I have absolutely no reason to believe that something is divine because some numbers match up. I think there's a lot of work to be done in between all of that.
Yeah, I think there is astrology there. I think there is numerology, obviously, gematria. Numbers have meaning. They're going to repeat these kinds of things, like you said. And 12 months. I mean, we had calendars long before these stories were written, and they had ways of measuring time. And clearly, I imagine these numbers found their way and crept into their mythologies as well. And so, I think there is overlap there. I wouldn't say it only is. This is the stuff that a lot of people who are in astrotheology, they might go too far, in my view. But thank you so much. Misinterpretations. Fantastic show.
Nice.
I identify so much. Got to run. Subscribe to her YouTube channel. She just did another video yesterday with there's so much overlap with the literature right around the Gospels, where she's pointing out materials that are not in our Gospels, that have like empty tomb scenes and all sorts of interesting stuff that is not Christian, but it's right there around the time the Gospels are written, which tells you it's a common theme trope in Greco-Roman literature. Iron Gate, read The Conspiracy Against the Human Race.
I think that is like anti-natalist philosophy, if I'm not confusing it with a different book. Starts with a C. It's like 5 letters and starts with a C. I can't think of the author. Please, someone put it in the chat. I have read it. I'm going to have to look it up really quick. Do you know what they're talking about here?
I don't.
It's fascinating. And the whole thing's not about anti-natalist philosophy. But it is, hold on, I can't type and do it at the same time. Oh no, it's Thomas Ligotti. I was confusing it. So forget what I said.
Okay.
I have this book. I have read it. That's why I'm wondering what I'm confusing it with. I'll put it in the chat later.
Okay. Well, I haven't read it, and I guess I do need to read it. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's what they're saying.
That's what they're saying. Okay. Thank you for the super chat. Chris McCarthy says, Brandon is the hardest hitting humanist with huge humility.
Too kind, but I'm a sucker for alliteration, so I'll take all those H's.
Yeah. Iron Gate again says, my cousin fell asleep and dreamt she was floating above herself, looking back at her body. She woke up to find out there was a gas leak. It was God, in quotes. That's typically how the interpretation would go. I mean, it's like, I found my car keys, or, people. I'm not trying to downplay the experience. I imagine for the moment, it's definitely like, my mom will call me about something and she'll go, thank God, God helped, and I'm like, yeah, I just go with it. Cause I'm not going to oh, actually, Mom, it's just not how I operate in the real world.
I think that's so funny, just to point out too. I think a lot of people who aren't an atheist and they see us do our shows and stuff, they think this is just like our entire personality. When I'm spending time with my wife and kids, I'm not talking about, the Exodus wasn't real, right? It's just, it's just so funny. I really think people think that about people like us, but anyways, I was right. The Conspiracy Against the Human Race does have a lot of anti-natalist and just in general nihilist philosophy, and it's based off Saran, or attributed also as influence, which is the C word I was thinking of. So I was close, but I was still off.
Wow. Well, thank you for that super chat. Gaziella Faraz, forgive me if you left a comment. Let me scroll up here, make sure I didn't miss any comment in case, because sometimes people will drop a comment underneath. Thank you so much for the super sticker. And I don't see a comment. And then we have, thank you so much, Albert Bernard Contreras. I'm freaking butchering your name. I apologize. Christianity gets started in ancient Greece. Seen videos by college professors mentioning Plato. Christianity seems to have emerged somewhere in the Galilee and Palestine. You even have like skeptics that were Christians, like Julian the Apostate, who literally calls Christians the Galileans because their literature seems to imply that's where they're from. That now doesn't mean all of the literature itself is from that area. Much of it may have been written in Rome, Alexandria, Egypt. I mean, there's all sorts of places where the material may have been written, but seems that the cult itself originated somewhere around Galilee, Jerusalem region. And I mean, ancient Greece it's Rome at this time. But yeah, so maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but thank you for the super chat. And Tyler V in the house. Thanks, Tyler. Good to see you here, man. It's been a long time. I'm glad to see you. Great show. Thanks, gents. What a way to cap off all the supers there. Final words from you before I get accused of being a red pillar here because I created a cartoon that I didn't realize had so many political implications from Matrix. And all I was trying to say is, by the way, my dad is the character in the cartoon at the outro who's saying, son, do you want to know the truth? And of course I want to know the truth. And I swallow the pill just like the movie. I'm just imitating the movie. And then I wake up and you'll see scholars in silhouettes who are reaching for me and they go on a spaceship. By the way, when you watch this cartoon at the end and I had a custom song made, you'll notice these power, like they're electrically driven, just like in the Matrix. They're these towers with all humans. If you look in the background, every one of these towers are like little pods, just like I wake up from my pod like Neo. And humans are powering these towers in the Matrix or outside of the Matrix, or I'm not sure which world that is, the real world. And if you look close, there's a symbol of a cross. There's the half moon crescent of Islam. And there's Judaism. There's different religious symbols all on the towers, and humans are the ones powering it. So I've never explained that. You're the first guy I've ever taken the time to explain the esoteric meaning of the
Nice.
Yeah. So final words from you though, Brandon.
Man, I'm just grateful to be here. Like I said, I've always felt there's certain people in this space that I look up to more or feel more connected with. And not that we all need to be similar. And I think every one of us is playing a part in ideally helping people think more critically, which is the whole goal in general. But I do appreciate you. I appreciate hanging out with you, man. It was a good time. I'm excited to do it again. And for anyone watching, I just hope that we can be gracious to each other whenever we disagree. And that ultimately, I think we all have the same goal, which is cool. We're all trying to live well and follow truth. Some of us just have different beliefs about what that is. So I'm all for finding the commonalities and the common denominators and working from there. And that's where I'm at right now. So peace and love.
Absolutely. I hope that everybody enjoyed this. If you found something useful, please use it. Again, I hope you'll go subscribe to my buddy's YouTube channel, MindShift. It is in the description. I've got it pinned in the comment section. Let's go show him some love. He's dropping videos on a regular basis. They're high quality, really good camera quality you have here. Your audio, visuals, everything's great. You're well-spoken, Brandon. I encourage people to go check it out. The Hypatia one, go check out I watched this one today, of course. Anyone, who's watching this, go watch him if you watch MythVision. And again, Brandon, I appreciate you. Look forward to doing this again, whether it's here or whether it's on your channel. Thanks, man.
Perfect, man. Appreciate that. Thanks.
And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.